The blizzard that changed everything started with Audrey Royce's stilettos clicking against frozen concrete, her breath visible in the dead factory air. She'd come to Greyhaven to bury this town's last hope, but in 12 hours she'd be crawling through freezing water beside a janitor she'd barely noticed fighting for her life. What happened next would strip away everything she thought mattered and rebuild her from the ruins up. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment below what city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this tale of redemption travels. The fluorescent lights in the abandoned section of Greyhaven Mill flickered like dying stars, casting irregular shadows across Audrey Royce's sharp features as she stood in what had once been the heart of American manufacturing. Her Louboutin heels echoed through the vast emptiness, each step a countdown to the factory's final breath. Outside, the December wind howled through broken windows, carrying the scent of rust and forgotten dreams. "Miss Royce, we should leave soon," her assistant Marcus called from behind a stack of boxes, his voice tight with concern. Weather service upgraded the storm warning. Audrey didn't look up from her tablet, her manicured fingers swiping through termination documents with practiced efficiency. "We leave when I'm finished, Marcus. These people have had 6 months' notice. 1 more hour won't kill them." The irony of those words would haunt her later. She'd built her reputation on moments like this, walking into dying companies and performing the final surgery with surgical precision. At 34, she was Creed & Associates' youngest senior partner, known in Manhattan boardrooms as the Closer. No sentiment, no hesitation, no looking back. Companies hired her because she could do what others couldn't, look workers in the eye and tell them their livelihoods were over. "Ma'am?" A quiet voice interrupted her thoughts. Audrey glanced up to see a man in his early 40s wearing a faded blue janitor's uniform with Linden stitched above the pocket. His face bore the weathered look of someone who'd worked with his hands all his life, strong jaw shadowed with stubble green eyes that held a weariness she'd seen in countless workers' faces before. His brown hair, slightly too long, fell across his forehead as he pushed a mop bucket across the scuffed linoleum. "The main office is locked for cleaning," she said curtly, not really looking at him. "Use the back entrance." "Actually, ma'am, I was going to tell you the weather's getting real bad. Most folks already headed home. Power's been flickering all day." His voice carried a soft Appalachian drawl, the kind that marked him as local, rooted everything she'd spent her life trying to escape. "Thank you for your concern," she replied, her tone suggesting anything but gratitude. "But I've driven through worse." Linden nodded slowly, the kind of nod that said he'd heard this before from people who thought they knew better. "If you say so, ma'am, just the old-timers say when the mill starts singing like this." He gestured to the groaning metal beams above. "It means trouble's coming." "Superstition won't save this place, Mr. Callum. Lyndon Callum." "Well, Mr. Callum, neither your superstitions nor your mop will change what happens to this factory. I suggest you focus on finding new employment." She turned back to her tablet, dismissing him. But Lyndon didn't move immediately. Instead, he studied her with those tired green eyes, seeing something she couldn't see herself. "You know, my grandmother used to say that storms have a way of teaching us what really matters. Maybe this one's coming for you, Ms. Royce." Before she could respond with the cutting remark forming on her lips, he was gone, the squeak of his bucket wheels fading into the darkness of the lower level. Marcus reappeared, juggling coffee cups and looking increasingly anxious. "Audrey, seriously, we need to go. The rental car place just called. They're closing early. Everyone's panicking about the storm." She took the coffee without looking up. "Let them panic. Fear is just weakness dressed up as wisdom." The lights flickered again, longer this time. Somewhere in the building's bones, metal shrieked against metal. "Did you get the signatures from the union rep?" she asked. "He left an hour ago. Said his kid was scared about the storm." "Of course he did." She snapped her laptop shut. "Fine. We'll finish this remotely. God knows this place isn't worth another—" The lights died. Not a flicker this time, but complete absolute darkness. The emergency lighting that should have kicked in remained dark. The backup generators had been sold off months ago, another casualty of the company's death spiral. "Marcus," her voice, usually so controlled, cracked slightly. "I'm here." His voice came from somewhere to her left, followed by the harsh light of his phone's flashlight. "Jesus Christ, it's dark." She pulled out her own phone, its light seeming pathetically small in the vast industrial space. No signal. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers. "The exit's this way," Marcus said, already moving. They made their way through the maze of empty workstations and silent machinery, their footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. The wind outside had escalated from a howl to a scream, and when they finally reached the main entrance, they found out why. The doors wouldn't budge. "What the hell?" Marcus threw his shoulder against them, but they didn't move an inch. Audrey pressed her face to the small window, using her phone's light to peer outside. What she saw made her stomach drop. Snow had drifted against the doors at least 5 feet high and growing. The parking lot where they'd left their rental car had vanished under a white tsunami that seemed to pulse and grow with each gust of wind. "The other exits," she said. But even as they ran through the building, checking door after door, they found the same thing. The blizzard hadn't just arrived, it had entombed them. "This is insane." Marcus was pacing now, his carefully styled hair falling into his eyes. "We're trapped in here." "Calm down," Audrey commanded, though her own heart was racing. "There has to be another way." That's when they heard it, the sound of singing, faint but clear, coming from somewhere deeper in the building. Not singing exactly, but humming. A child's tune, something simple and sweet that seemed impossibly out of place in this industrial mausoleum. Following the sound, they found Lyndon in a small break room, a battery-powered lantern, casting a warm glow as he cleaned out his locker. The humming was coming from a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, a young girl's voice, maybe 7 or 8 years old. "Daddy, are you still there?" Lyndon pressed the button. "I'm here, baby girl, just packing up." "Grandma says the storm's really bad. She says you should stay put till morning." "Might have to, Clara. You be good for Grandma Liz, okay?" "I drew you another picture today. It's you fighting a dragon, but the dragon's really a big machine and you're protecting our castle." Despite everything, Lyndon smiled. "Can't wait to see it, sweetheart." He noticed Audrey and Marcus standing in the doorway and clicked off the walkie-talkie. "You folks didn't make it out, huh?" "The doors are blocked," Marcus said, his voice edged with panic. "We're trapped." Lyndon nodded as if this was exactly what he'd expected. "Told you the mill was singing. This building's seen 150 years of storms. This one's different, though. This one's angry." "Don't be ridiculous," Audrey snapped. "Storms don't have emotions." "Maybe not," Lyndon said, pulling a thermos from his locker. "But they sure do have timing. Coffee? It's still warm." "We need to call for help," Marcus insisted, waving his dead phone. "The police, the fire department, someone. Landlines have been down for months," Lyndon said calmly, pouring coffee into the thermos lid. "Company stopped paying for them. Cell towers probably went down with the wind. We're on our own till morning. This is insane." Marcus was spiraling now. "We can't just stay here. The building could collapse." "Could you?" Lyndon agreed. "Especially the West Wing. Roof's been compromised for years, but this section's solid, built in 1892 back when they made things to last." He offered the coffee to Audrey. She stared at it for a moment, this simple gesture of kindness from a man whose job she was eliminating, then took it with unsteady hands. The warmth was shocking, almost painful against her frozen fingers. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "There's an old supervisor's office on the 2nd floor," Lyndon continued. "Still has a couch and some blankets, even a little propane heater I've been using during my breaks. It's not much, but it'll keep us alive till morning." "Alive?" Marcus's voice cracked. "You think we might not—" "I think we'll be fine if we're smart about it," Lyndon interrupted gently. "But this storm's not playing around. Temperature's dropping fast. Without power, this place is going to get cold. Real cold." As if to emphasize his point, their breath suddenly became visible in the lantern light. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees in the last few minutes. "Follow me," Lyndon said, picking up his lantern. "And stay close. This place is a maze in the dark." They climbed the metal stairs, their footsteps ringing hollow in the darkness. Audrey found herself gripping the railing with both hands, her usual confidence shaken by the complete absence of control. She'd navigated hostile takeovers, faced down boards of directors, but she'd never been truly powerless before. The supervisor's office was exactly as Lyndon described, a small oasis of faded comfort in the industrial wilderness. A cracked leather couch sat against one wall, a desk buried under years of dust dominated another. Lyndon lit the propane heater, its blue flame casting dancing shadows. "There's some vending machines down the hall," he said. "Still got some stuff in them. I'll go break them open." "That's theft," Audrey said automatically. Lyndon looked at her with something between amusement and pity. "Ms. Royce, you're shutting this place down tomorrow. I don't think anyone's going to miss some stale chips and candy bars." After he left, Marcus collapsed on the couch, his head in his hands. "This can't be happening. I have a presentation tomorrow. The partners are expecting us back." "The partners can wait," Audrey said, surprising herself with the words. She moved to the window, wiping away years of grime to peer outside. The storm had transformed the familiar landscape into something alien. Snow fell not in flakes, but in sheets, horizontal walls of white that made it impossible to see more than a few feet. "Daddy!" The walkie-talkie on Lyndon's belt crackled to life again as he returned with an armful of snacks. "Daddy, are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby. Just camping out at work tonight. Like when we made the fort in the living room. Exactly like that." "Are you alone?" Lyndon glanced at Audrey and Marcus. "No, sweetheart. I've got some friends here." "Real friends or work friends?" The innocence of the question made something twist in Audrey's chest. When was the last time she'd had a real friend? Someone who knew her beyond her reputation, her success rate, her billable hours. "We'll see, Clara. We'll see." As the night deepened, the storm's fury grew. The building shrieked and groaned like a living thing, and somewhere in the distance they heard the crash of something massive falling. "West wing roof," Lyndon said quietly. "Told you it was going." Marcus whimpered from the couch, but Audrey found herself oddly calm. She watched Lyndon as he checked his walkie-talkie, adjusted the heater, rationed out their meager supplies with the efficiency of someone used to making do with less. His hands were scarred, she noticed, marked by years of honest work. When was the last time her hands had built something instead of tearing it down? "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. Lyndon looked up from where he was arranging blankets on the floor. "Shoot." "Why aren't you angry? I'm literally here to destroy your life, and you're sharing your coffee with me." He was quiet for a long moment, considering. "You're not destroying my life, Ms. Royce. You're just doing your job. My life's that little girl on the walkie-talkie. My life's my grandmother who raised me when my parents died. My life's the memories in these walls, the friends I've made, the work I've done. You can take away my job, but you can't touch any of that. But without income, we'll manage. We always have. Folks around here, we look after each other. Mrs. Chen from the grocery store already offered me some shifts. Pastor Williams needs help with the church maintenance. It won't be much, but Clara won't go hungry. And her medical bills." The question slipped out before she could stop it. She'd seen the medical forms in his locker, the diagnosis that made her stomach turn. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, the kind that drained bank accounts as fast as it drained hope. Lyndon's face tightened. "How did you—" "I'm thorough in my research, and—" "Of course you are." He turned away, but not before she saw the flash of pain in his eyes. "We'll figure it out. Always do." "The company's severance package is insulting," she heard herself say. "Barely enough to cover a month of treatment." "I know." "I could—" She stopped. What could she do? She was here to maximize efficiency, minimize costs. Compassion wasn't in her job description. "Daddy?" Clara's voice interrupted. "Grandma wants to know if you remembered your medicine." "Tell her I did," Lyndon replied, though Audrey noticed he hadn't taken anything since they'd been here. "She says you're lying." Despite everything, Lyndon chuckled. "That woman knows me too well. Tell her I'll take it right now." He pulled a prescription bottle from his pocket, dry swallowing 2 pills. Antidepressants, Audrey noticed. Of course. A dying daughter, a dying job, a dying town. How else could someone keep going? The walkie-talkie crackled again. "Daddy, can you tell me a story? The storm's really loud and I'm scared." "Of course, baby girl." He settled against the wall, the walkie-talkie cradled in his scarred hands. Once upon a time, there was a brave princess named Clara, who lived in a castle made of dreams. As Lyndon spun his tale, his voice soft and warm despite everything Audrey found herself drawn in. The story was simple but beautiful, full of hope and courage and love. Marcus had fallen asleep on the couch, snoring softly, but Audrey remained awake, watching this man she'd dismissed as insignificant reveal depths she'd never imagined. The princess knew that storms don't last forever, Lyndon was saying, and after every storm, the sun comes out twice as bright. Is that true, Daddy? It's the truest thing I know, sweetheart. After Clara signed off to go to sleep, the office fell silent, except for the storm's rage. Lyndon offered Audrey a blanket, which she accepted gratefully. The temperature had continued dropping, and even with the heater, she could see her breath. She sounds wonderful, Audrey said quietly. She's everything, Lyndon replied simply. Been just the two of us since her mom died 3 years ago. Car accident. Clara was in the back seat, not a scratch on her. Miracle, they said. Then the cancer diagnosis came 6 months later. Guess miracles have a price. I'm sorry. Don't be. Every day I get with her is worth it. Even days like this. He gestured to their situation. You know what she told me when she started chemo? She said, Daddy, if I can be brave, you can be brave too. 7 years old and she's teaching me about courage. Audrey pulled the blanket tighter, but the cold she felt went deeper than the temperature. I don't have children. Never wanted them. They seemed like a distraction from success. Depends on how you define success, I guess. Money, power, respect. And do you have those things? Yes. Then why do you look so cold, Ms. Royce? And I don't mean from the storm. She didn't answer because she didn't know how. Instead, she watched the lantern flame flicker, creating shadows that danced like ghosts of all the workers who'd once filled this place with life and purpose. Around midnight, the building gave a tremendous groan, and they heard the sharp crack of breaking glass somewhere below. That's not good, Lyndon said, standing quickly. The windows in the loading dock. If they're breaking, the pressure differential could... Another crack closer this time. We need to move, he said urgently. Now! Marcus woke with a start as Lyndon grabbed the emergency supplies, the lantern blankets, his walkie-talkie, the remaining food. What's happening? Building's losing integrity. The storm's creating pressure pockets. We need to get to the basement. The basement? Audrey stood, adrenaline cutting through her exhaustion. Won't we be trapped? There are old tunnels down there, service corridors from when this was part of the Underground Railroad. They're our best shot if the building starts coming down. They rushed down the stairs, the sound of breaking glass following them like pursuing demons. The darkness seemed alive, reaching for them with frozen fingers. Marcus slipped on the third landing, crying out as his ankle twisted. I can't, he gasped. Leave me. Nobody's leaving anybody, Lyndon said firmly, pulling Marcus's arm over his shoulder. Miss Royce, take the lantern. Lead the way. She grabbed the light, her hand surprisingly steady as she navigated the treacherous descent. Behind them, the building's death throes grew louder. A beam crashed through the ceiling of the floor they'd just left, and she heard Marcus whimper. The basement was a maze of ancient machinery and modern storage, but Lyndon directed her with calm precision. Left at the boiler, right at the old coal chute. There, that metal door. The door was rusted shut, decades of neglect sealing it like a tomb. Lyndon set Marcus down gently and threw his shoulder against it. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. Together, Audrey said, setting down the lantern. They hit the door in unison, and on the third try it shrieked open, revealing a tunnel that seemed to exhale decades of stale air. The walls were stone, sweating with moisture, and the floor was covered in an inch of black water. This is insane, Marcus moaned. We're going to die down here. We're going to live, Lyndon corrected. Because that little girl upstairs needs her daddy, and you two probably have people who need you too. Audrey wanted to say no, she didn't have anyone, but the words stuck in her throat. Was that really true? Or had she just pushed everyone away in pursuit of a success that now seemed as cold and empty as this tunnel? They pressed forward, the water soaking through their shoes, the walls pressing close. The lantern cast wild shadows that made every step treacherous. Behind them, they could hear the building crying out in pain, and once a tremendous crash that shook dust from the tunnel ceiling. "How far?" Audrey asked, her teeth chattering. "Not sure. Never been all the way through. But my grandmother told me stories, said her father used these tunnels during Prohibition running liquor from Canada." "Your family's been here that long?" "Since 1843. We helped build this place and will probably watch it die." "I'm sorry, Us," she said, and meant it. "Don't apologize. Just remember that every company you close, every job you cut, there are families like mine with roots that go deep. We're not just numbers on your spreadsheet." The tunnel seemed endless, and the cold was seeping into their bones. Marcus was barely conscious, supported entirely by Lyndon now. Audrey's fingers were numb around the lantern handle, and she could feel her body starting to shut down, preserving core temperature at the expense of extremities. Then, impossibly, she smelled something. Soup. Tomato soup. "Do you smell that?" she asked, wondering if hypothermia was causing hallucinations. Lyndon lifted his head, sniffing the air. His eyes widened. "That's impossible." Following the scent like bloodhounds, they turned a corner and found a junction where 4 tunnels met. In the center, sitting on an old wooden crate, as if it had been waiting for them, was a thermos. Lyndon's thermos, the one he'd left in his locker. But that was impossible. His locker was 3 floors up and half a building away. With shaking hands, he opened it. Steam rose, and the smell of tomato soup filled the air. Attached was a note in spidery handwriting. "Lyndon knew you'd end up here. The old ways always work. Follow the left tunnel. Love, Grandma Liz." "How?" Audrey breathed. "My grandmother," Lyndon said, his voice thick with emotion. "She must have. There must be another entrance I don't know about. She's lived here all her life, knows secrets about this place that nobody else does." They passed the thermos around the hot soup, bringing life back to their frozen bodies. Even Marcus rallied his eyes, focusing for the first time in an hour. The left tunnel, as promised, led to a ladder. Ancient iron rungs driven into stone leading up into darkness. Lyndon went first, testing each rung. Audrey followed, then Marcus, who needed both of them to help him climb. At the top, Lyndon pushed against a wooden hatch. It resisted, then gave way with a crash, and suddenly they were breathing fresh air. Snow immediately whipped into their faces, but it was the most beautiful thing Audrey had ever felt. They emerged in what looked like a tool shed about 100 yards from a small house with warm yellow light glowing from its windows. The storm still raged, but the house was a beacon promising warmth and safety. "That's my house," Lyndon said, disbelief in his voice. "That's my house." They struggled through the snow, supporting each other, fighting for every step. The wind tried to knock them down, the cold tried to stop them, but they pressed on. And then the door was opening, and an elderly woman with Lyndon's green eyes was pulling them inside, and a little girl with a pale face but bright smile was throwing herself into Lyndon's arms. "Daddy, you made it. Just like the princess in the story." The house was small but warm, filled with the smell of wood smoke and cooking food. Lyndon's grandmother Elizabeth, she insisted Audrey call her, wrapped them in quilts and forced hot tea into their hands. She checked Marcus's ankle with practiced efficiency, declaring it sprained but not broken. "How did you know?" Audrey asked her. "How did you know about the tunnels?" Elizabeth smiled, her weathered face crinkling. "My family's been in these hills for almost 200 years, young lady. We know things, we prepare for things, and we take care of our own." "But we're not your own." "Aren't you? You're here in my home drinking my tea saved by my grandson. That makes you family, at least for tonight." Clara, despite the late hour and her obvious fatigue from treatment, insisted on showing Audrey her drawings. They covered every surface, brave knights who looked suspiciously like Lyndon fighting dragons, protecting castles, saving princesses. "This one's my favorite," Clara said, showing a picture of a man in a janitor's uniform standing tall while a storm raged around him. "That's Daddy. He's the strongest person in the whole world." Looking at Lyndon as he held his daughter, exhaustion written in every line of his face, but love shining in his eyes, Audrey thought Clara might be right. Her phone miraculously had survived and found a weak signal. The messages poured in dozens from her firm, from clients, from competitors, already circling her absence like sharks. One stood out from Dalton Creed himself. "Heard you're stuck in that backwater town. Don't worry, I'll handle the Morrison acquisition. Partner's very impressed with my initiative. She should have been furious. The Morrison acquisition was her project, her key to making senior partner. Instead, sitting in this warm kitchen watching a family that had lost so much still find reasons to smile, she felt nothing. No rage, no disappointment, just a strange sense of relief. Bad news? Lyndon asked, noticing her expression. My colleague is stealing my promotion. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm beginning to think he's doing me a favor. Elizabeth served them beef stew, thick and rich and impossibly good. They ate in silence at first, the warmth seeping back into their bones. Marcus fell asleep in his chair, his head tilted back, snoring softly. Clara curled up against her father, fighting sleep but losing. We could have died tonight, Audrey said quietly. But we didn't, Lyndon replied. Sometimes that's all that matters. You saved us. You had every reason to let us freeze, but you saved us. That's not who I am. Who are you then? He considered the question absently, stroking Clara's hair. I'm a father, a son, a grandson, a neighbor, a worker, a man trying to do right in a world that doesn't always make that easy. And me, what am I? That's not for me to say, but I think tonight might have shown you some things about that question. Elizabeth returned from the kitchen with a photo album, settling into her rocking chair with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime in that exact spot. Would you like to see some history, Ms. Royce? The album was filled with black and white photographs dating back over a century. Workers at the mill, families at church picnics, children playing in the same streets now buried under snow. And through it all, the Callum family generation after generation tied to this place, this community. That's my grandfather. Elizabeth pointed to a stern-looking man in a supervisor's uniform. Worked that mill for 43 years, never missed a day. And that's my mother, she ran the company store. And here, she turned the page, that's Lyndon's parents on their wedding day, high school sweethearts. When they died in that mining accident, the whole town came together to help raise him. Mining accident. Ceiling collapse at the Brennan mine. 17 dead. Lyndon was 10. Elizabeth's voice was matter-of-fact, but her hand trembled slightly. This town's seen its share of tragedy, but we endure. We always endure. Audrey studied the photographs all these lives, intertwined, supporting each other through decades of joy and sorrow. Her own family album, if such a thing existed, would show isolated individuals scattered across the country, connected by nothing but DNA and the occasional terse holiday card. Why do you stay? She asked. Why not leave for somewhere with more opportunities? Opportunities for what? Elizabeth countered. To be strangers among strangers, to lose ourselves in pursuit of something we can't even name. This is our home, Ms. Royce. These are our people. That's worth more than any salary. Even when the mill closes, even when there's nothing left. There's always something left. The land remains, the people remain. And from those two things, we can rebuild anything. Clara stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about dragons. Lyndon adjusted the blanket around her, his movements infinitely gentle. She's getting worse, isn't she? Audrey said quietly. The treatments aren't working as well as we'd hoped. Doctors want to try a new protocol, but insurance won't cover it. Experimental, they say. How much? More than I'll make in 5 years. More than I could borrow if every person in this town emptied their savings. There must be programs, charities. We're on every waiting list, but time. He didn't finish the sentence. Audrey felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she'd built so carefully over years of corporate warfare. This man who'd saved her life couldn't save his daughters. This family that had given everything to their community would lose everything to a disease that didn't care about courage or kindness. Her phone buzzed. Another message from New York, another crisis that seemed suddenly impossibly trivial. She turned it off. The storm continued through the night, but its fury seemed distant, now muffled by warmth and safety. Marcus woke periodically, disoriented and complaining, but Elizabeth managed him with the patience of a woman who'd raised children and grandchildren and half the neighborhood besides. As dawn approached, the wind finally began to die. Audrey stood at the window, watching the first pale light reveal a transformed landscape. The town was buried under feet of snow, but smoke rose from chimneys, and she could see people already beginning to dig out, helping neighbors, checking on the elderly. "It's beautiful," she said, surprised by her own words. "It is Lyndon agreed, joining her at the window. "Different from your New York, I bet." "Like another planet." "Which one do you prefer?" She didn't answer immediately, watching an elderly man help his neighbor clear her driveway. Such a simple act of kindness, yet when was the last time she'd seen anything like it in Manhattan? "I don't know anymore." Clara woke with the dawn, immediately asking if everyone was okay, if the storm was over, if the dragon had been defeated. Despite her pallor, despite the dark circles under her eyes, she radiated a joy that seemed impossible given her circumstances. "Ms. Royce," she said shyly, "would you like to see my treasure box?" The treasure box was a shoebox covered in glitter and stickers filled with what Clara considered precious: a smooth stone from the creek, a bird feather, a photograph of her parents, a hospital bracelet covered in smiley face stickers. From my first treatment, I was brave, and a folded piece of paper. "What's that?" Audrey asked. "My wish list. Daddy says if you write down wishes, sometimes they come true." Against her better judgment, Audrey asked, "What did you wish for?" "To get better, for Daddy to smile more, for the mill to stay open so Daddy can keep his job, and for snow because I love snow." She grinned. "I got one wish already. The innocence of it." The simple faith that writing wishes on paper could change reality made Audrey's throat tight. She thought of her own wishes, all of them centered on money and power and beating the competition. When had she stopped wishing for things that actually mattered? Elizabeth made breakfast pancakes and bacon and eggs, the kind of meal Audrey hadn't eaten in years, too concerned with calories and appearances. But she ate every bite, tasting something in that simple food that no five-star restaurant had ever provided. "The roads should be clear enough by noon," Elizabeth said. "The county boys are good about plowing. You'll be able to get back to your lives." Back to their lives. Audrey's life of hostile takeovers and empty apartments and colleagues who would stab her in the back for a percentage point. Marcus's life of desperation and anxiety and never being quite good enough. Was that really living? Her phone rang. Dalton Creed. "Audrey heard you got caught in that storm. Very dramatic. Anyway, just wanted to let you know I've successfully wrapped up the Morrison deal. The partners are thrilled. Oh, and they've decided to accelerate the Greyhaven closure. We're announcing tomorrow instead of next quarter. Stock price should jump nicely. You're still handling the paperwork, right?" Dalton. "Gotta run. Big celebration lunch with the partners. You understand? Next time, try not to get stuck in the sticks." "Yeah." He hung up before she could respond. She stared at the phone, this device that connected her to a world that suddenly seemed as cold and lifeless as the mill's abandoned floors. "Everything okay?" Lyndon asked. "They're accelerating the closure. Announcing tomorrow. The severance packages will be even smaller because of the early termination clauses." His face went pale, but he managed a resigned nod. "Well, at least we know." "It's not right." Since when has that mattered? She wanted to argue to defend the system she'd spent her career serving, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. Right and wrong had never entered the equation, only profit and loss. The sun climbed higher, revealing the storm's full aftermath. Trees down power lines, snapped cars buried, but also people helping people, sharing generators, shoveling walks, checking on neighbors. The mill stood in the distance, partially collapsed, but still standing, a wounded giant refusing to fall. "I should go," Marcus said, testing his wrapped ankle. "See if I can get a rental car, get back to civilization." That word civilization hung in the air like an insult, as if this place, these people were something less than civilized. Audrey had thought the same thing just yesterday, now watching Elizabeth teach Clara to knit. Watching Lyndon repair a neighbor's broken window, without being asked, she wondered who was really civilized. "I'll drive you to town," Lyndon offered. "Truck should be able to get through." "I'll come too," Audrey said quickly. She needed to see the damage needed to understand what the storm had done to this place she'd come to destroy. The drive through town was a revelation. The storm had been devastating. Roofs, collapsed windows, shattered trees through houses. But everywhere people were working together. The local diner was giving out free coffee and sandwiches. The church had become an emergency shelter. Kids were already building snowmen in yards, their laughter bright against the white landscape. They passed the mill and Linden slowed. The west wing had completely collapsed, tons of brick and steel, crushed under the weight of snow and wind. But the main building stood damaged but defiant. 150 years, Linden murmured, survived the Civil War, the Depression, 2 world wars. And now it dies because some hedge fund in New York needs to show quarterly growth, Audrey finished bitterly. Marcus looked at her strangely. That's our job, Audrey. That's what we do. I know what we do, Marcus. I'm beginning to question why we do it. They found the rental car office closed, but the owner, recognizing their plight, opened up special for them. Marcus immediately began making calls, arranging his escape back to New York. But Audrey found herself hesitating. You coming? Marcus asked. I can wait if you need to get your things. She looked at Linden, who was helping the rental car owner clear snow from the vehicles. I need to finish some paperwork. You go ahead. Marcus shrugged, clearly eager to leave this place behind. As his car disappeared down the freshly plowed road, Audrey felt something she hadn't expected: relief. Thought you'd be eager to get back, Linden said, not looking at her. So did I. They drove back to his house in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Clara was waiting at the window, waving excitedly when she saw them return. Ms. Royce, you came back. I thought you'd leave like everyone always does. That innocent statement hit harder than any corporate attack ever had. The rest of the day passed in a blur of small moments that somehow felt more significant than any deal she'd ever closed. Helping Elizabeth cook lunch, playing cards with Clara, watching Linden split wood for the fire, his movements efficient and graceful. Real work producing real warmth, not the abstract manipulation of numbers that defined her career. As evening approached, her phone rang again. The senior partner, Richard Stein. Audrey, where the hell are you? Dalton says you're still in that nowhere town. The announcement is tomorrow. We need you back here. Richard, about the severance packages. Already decided, minimum legally required. Stock price projections look fantastic. This is going to be a big win for us. These people have families, medical bills. Not our problem. Jesus, Audrey, don't go soft on me now. You're the closer, remember. This is what you do. What if I don't want to do it anymore? Silence. Then cold and sharp. Then you're done at this firm and every other firm in the city. You know how this works, Audrey. You're either with us or you're nobody. He hung up. She stood there, phone in hand, feeling the weight of the decision crushing down on her. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd sacrificed, it all came down to this moment. This choice. Daddy, is Ms. Royce okay? Clara's worried voice carried from the living room. I don't know, sweetheart. But suddenly Audrey did know. She knew with a clarity that cut through years of ambition and compromise. She looked at this family that had lost so much but still had everything that mattered. She thought about the mill, the workers, the town that deserved better than to be a casualty of someone else's greed. She dialed Richard back. Good. You've come to your senses. I quit. What? I quit. Effective immediately. I'll send the files to Dalton. He seems eager to finish destroying this place. You're making a huge mistake, Audrey. You'll never work in this industry again. I know, she said, and found herself smiling. I'm counting on it. She hung up and threw her phone into the snow outside. It disappeared into a drift, taking with it her connection to that other life, that other version of herself. When she turned around, Linden was standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. You just destroyed your career. Maybe. Or maybe I just saved my life. The morning after Audrey threw her phone into the snow arrived with a deceptive calm. The storm had passed, leaving Greyhaven wrapped in a pristine white blanket that hid the damage underneath like makeup covering bruises. She stood at Elizabeth's kitchen window wearing borrowed clothes that smelled of lavender detergent, watching the town slowly dig itself out. You sleep at all? Linden's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him already dressed for work, his janitor's uniform pressed despite everything. Not much. You're going to the mill. Someone needs to assess the damage. Insurance adjusters won't be here for days, and the company... He shrugged. Well, the company doesn't care anymore, does it? I suppose not. She hesitated, then said, I'll come with you. He looked surprised. You don't have to. Yes, I do. I helped create this mess. The least I can do is witness it. Clara was at the kitchen table working on another drawing despite the IV line in her arm connected to a portable infusion pump. The morning treatment, Elizabeth had explained quietly, every Tuesday and Friday turning their kitchen into a makeshift medical ward. Are you going on an adventure? Clara asked, looking up with those impossibly bright eyes. Something like that, Audrey replied. Can you bring back a story? I love stories. I'll do my best. The drive to the mill was slow. Lyndon's truck grinding through snowdrifts that hadn't been touched by plows. They passed houses with blue tarps over damaged roofs, fallen trees being chainsawed into manageable pieces, neighbors helping neighbors in that unconscious way of communities that actually functioned as communities. Your grandmother was right, Audrey said suddenly, about storms teaching us what matters. She usually is. Drives me crazy sometimes. Must be nice having someone who's usually right in your life. You don't... She thought about it. I have people who are usually profitable. It's not the same thing. The mill looked worse in daylight. The west wing was completely gone, reduced to a pile of rubble and twisted metal. The main building had suffered 2 windows blown out, sections of roof peeled back like sardine cans. But the bones remained the 19th century craftsmanship, refusing to yield completely. They parked and made their way inside through a loading dock door that hung off its hinges. The interior was a disaster. Snow had blown through broken windows, covering machinery that would now rust beyond repair. Ceiling tiles littered the floor like fallen leaves. In the accounting office, papers were scattered everywhere, including the termination documents she'd been reviewing just 2 days ago. 43 people, Lyndon said, picking up one of the sheets. 43 families counting on these jobs. I know their names, Audrey said quietly. I memorized them all. Sarah Chen, single mother of 3. Robert Torres, 2 years from retirement. Mary Sullivan taking care of her disabled husband. She paused. I told myself knowing their names made me thorough. Really, it just made me cruel. They climbed to the 2nd floor where the supervisor's office they'd sheltered in was now exposed to the elements, one wall completely gone. The couch where Marcus had slept was covered in snow. The thermos that had saved them sat on the desk, a reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. This place meant everything to my grandfather, Lyndon said, running his hand along a wooden beam. He carved his initials here when he was 16, first day on the job. Worked here until the day he died, heart attack, right on the factory floor. They said he was smiling when they found him, happy to die where he'd lived. That's either beautiful or tragic. I can't decide which. Maybe both. Most true things are. They heard footsteps on the stairs and turned to see a group of workers, arriving people whose jobs Audrey had been sent to eliminate. She recognized them from their files. Tom Brennan, the floor supervisor with 30 years' experience. Janet Rodriguez, the quality control manager who'd never missed a day. David Kim, the maintenance chief who kept the ancient machinery running through skill and prayer. They stopped when they saw her recognition flickering across their faces. You're the one from corporate, Tom said, his voice neutral, but his eyes hard. Come to survey your handiwork. Tom, Lyndon started, but Audrey held up her hand. Yes, I'm from corporate. Was from corporate. I quit yesterday. After the damage was done, Janet said bitterly. After the decision was made. You're right. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't feed our families, David added. Sorry doesn't pay for my wife's insulin. No, it doesn't. Audrey faced them directly, not flinching from their anger. I can't undo what's been done, but maybe I can help figure out what comes next. What comes next is unemployment, Tom said. What comes next is losing our homes. What comes next is watching this town die. Unless we don't let it, Lyndon said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. He was staring at the exposed machinery, the bones of the mill laid bare by the storm's fury. The building's damaged, but not destroyed. The machinery's mostly intact under the snow. We know this place, know how to run it. What if we didn't need corporate... What are you talking about? Janet asked. Worker cooperative. I've been reading about them. Workers own the company, make the decisions, share the profits. There's a textile mill in North Carolina that did it when their parent company abandoned them. They're thriving now. With what money? Tom challenged. You need capital to buy the assets, restart production. We're all living paycheck to paycheck. The assets are worthless to corporate now, Audrey said, her mind already working through the possibilities. Storm damage, insurance complications, environmental cleanup. They'll want to wash their hands of this place. They might sell for pennies on the dollar just to avoid the liability. Pennies we don't have, David pointed out. But I do. The words were out before Audrey fully thought them through. Everyone stared at her. I have savings, investments. My apartment in Manhattan is worth a lot. If I liquidate everything, why would you do that? Janet's suspicion was naked in her voice. Audrey thought about Clara's drawings, about Elizabeth's photo albums, about Lyndon saving their lives without hesitation. Because I've spent my career destroying things. Maybe it's time I helped build something. The silence stretched until Tom finally broke it with a harsh laugh. You're serious. You're actually serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. They spent the rest of the morning walking through the mill, assessing damage with new eyes, not calculating loss but imagining possibility. The workers' knowledge was encyclopedic. They knew every machine, every quirk, every shortcut and secret that kept the place running. Tom explained how they could reconfigure the production line for efficiency. Janet detailed quality improvements corporate had always rejected as too expensive. David listed repairs he'd been wanting to make for years. We could start small, Lyndon suggested. Focus on specialty items, high-quality goods that command premium prices. There's a market for American-made textiles, especially with the heritage angle. My cousin runs a boutique in Boston, Janet added, warming to the idea. She's always looking for authentic, locally made products. Says her customers will pay triple for the story behind the product. The story, Audrey repeated, something clicking in her mind. That's what we're really selling. Not just textiles, but tradition, history, community. Pretty words don't pay bills, Tom said, but his hostility had softened slightly. No, but they do drive sales. I've spent 10 years in corporate America. I know how to package a narrative, how to reach markets. You all know how to make things. Together we're still a group of broke people standing in a broken building, David said, but he was smiling slightly. Broken things can be fixed, Lyndon said. Sometimes they come back stronger. They were interrupted by the arrival of more people workers who'd heard through the town's mysterious communication network that something was happening at the mill. Soon there were 20, then 30, all looking at the damage but also listening as Lyndon and Audrey outlined their insane, impossible, absolutely necessary idea. It would take everything we have, said Mary Sullivan, the woman whose husband was disabled. Every penny of savings, every favor we can call in. The bank won't lend to us, Robert Torres added. He was the one 2 years from retirement, his pension now evaporated. Not for something like this. We don't need the bank, Audrey said. We need each other. And we need to move fast before corporate decides to just demolish everything for the land value. You really think we can do this? Sarah Chen asked. She had her youngest with her, a boy of maybe 5 who was building a tiny snowman on a workbench. Audrey looked around the room at these people she'd been prepared to discard like broken equipment. She saw fear, yes, but also something else. Hope, maybe. Or defiance. Or both. I think we don't have a choice. It's either try this or watch everything disappear. I need to think about it, Tom said finally. We all do. This isn't something you decide in a morning. Think fast, Audrey warned. Corporate will send another team soon. Once they assess the storm damage, they'll move to liquidation. We have maybe a week, 2 at most. As the crowd dispersed, each taking the impossible idea home, to worry over like a sore tooth, Lyndon and Audrey remained. They stood in a shaft of sunlight coming through a broken window, dust motes dancing around them like possibilities. You know this is insane, he said. Completely. You could lose everything. I already did when I threw that phone in the snow. This is just making it official. Why are you really doing this, Audrey? She thought about all the complex reasons, the guilt and revelation and transformation of the last 48 hours. But in the end, it came down to something simple. Because Clara asked me to bring back a story. I want it to be a good one. They drove back to the house to find Clara having a bad day. The morning treatment had left her nauseated and weak, and she was curled on the couch while Elizabeth read to her from a worn copy of Anne of Green Gables. "How's our princess?" Lyndon asked, kneeling beside her. "The dragon's winning today, Daddy," she said weakly. "But tomorrow I'll be stronger." "I know you will, baby." Audrey watched them, this father and daughter, facing the ultimate unfairness with such grace, and felt her resolve harden. She might not be able to fix Claire's illness, but she could try to fix this one thing: give this family and this town a fighting chance. That evening, Elizabeth made a simple dinner of soup and bread, but the kitchen was full of visitors. Word had spread about the cooperative idea, and people came with questions, concerns, and occasionally cautious excitement. "My grandfather helped build that mill," said elderly Carl Brennan. "I've got some money saved. Not much, but if it would help." "The church could organize fundraisers," offered Pastor Williams. "Bake sales, car washes. Every little bit right." "I know someone at the State Development Office," added Maria Santos, who ran the local diner. "They have grants for worker cooperatives. It's not much, but..." Each offer was small, but together they began to add up to something. Audrey took notes, her mind calculating, strategizing. This wasn't like corporate finance, clean, cold, abstract. This was messy and personal and real. "We'd need at least 200,000 just to start," she said finally. "Purchase the assets, basic repairs, initial materials, operating capital for the first few months." The room went quiet. It might as well have been 2 million for these people. "I can provide 100,000, Audrey said. "Maybe 120 if my apartment sells quickly." "That leaves 80,000, Tom said. He'd arrived halfway through dinner, snow still on his boots. "Might as well be the moon." "Not the moon," Elizabeth said quietly from her chair by the fire. "Just a very tall mountain. And we're mountain people, aren't we?" "What are you saying, Grandma?" Lyndon asked. "I'm saying that this family has been here since 1843. We've survived wars and depressions and floods and fires. You think we saved nothing in all that time?" She stood moving to an old secretary desk in the corner. From a hidden drawer, she pulled out a bank book. $43,000, 5 generations of Callum savings. Was meant for Claire's treatment if the insurance failed, but no, Lyndon said immediately. "Absolutely not. We're not risking Claire's life for this." "We're risking her future if we don't," Elizabeth replied sharply. "What good is treatment if she survives only to grow up in a dead town with no opportunities?" "What kind of life is that?" "A life?" Lyndon's voice cracked. "It's still a life." Clara, who'd been quiet on the couch, spoke up in her small voice. "Daddy, can I see the bank book?" "Sweetheart, this is grown-up talk." "Please." Elizabeth handed it to her. Clara studied it with the seriousness only a sick child could muster, someone who'd learned too young that numbers on medical charts meant everything. "This is a lot of money," she said. "Yes, it is," Lyndon agreed, "but not enough for the new treatment anyway, right? The one that costs 300,000. The adults exchanged glances. They'd tried to keep that number from her, but children heard everything, especially children who spent a lot of time in quiet hospital rooms. "No, baby, not enough for that." Clara nodded, then handed the book back to her great-grandmother. "Then we should use it for the mill. At least that way it helps everyone." "Clara, I'm not giving up Daddy. I'm just being real. That's what you taught me, right? Be brave and be real." Lyndon pulled her into his arms, and Audrey had to turn away from the naked pain on his face. Through the window, she could see the mill in the distance, lit by the setting sun. It looked like it was on fire, but the good kind of fire, the kind that refined rather than destroyed. "I know someone," she said suddenly, "from business school. Marcus Chen. Different. Marcus, not my assistant. He runs a social impact fund. They specifically invest in projects like this. I could call him." "After you threw your phone in the snow?" Tom asked, and there was almost humor in his voice. "I'll borrow one. Elizabeth, may I?" The old woman handed her an ancient rotary phone, and Audrey dialed from memory, grateful that some habits die hard. "Marcus?" "It's Audrey Royce." "Yes, I know. It's been years. Listen, I have a proposition for you. A worker cooperative in Pennsylvania textile mill, strong community support. Yes, I'm serious. No, I haven't lost my mind. I found it. The conversation lasted an hour. She had to answer a dozen skeptical questions, provide financial projections she was making up on the fly promise documentation she didn't have yet. But Marcus had always been different, someone who went to business school to change the world rather than rule it. He'll consider it, she said when she finally hung up. Wants to see a business plan, community commitment documents, evidence of worker buy-in. But he could potentially provide up to $50,000 in low-interest loans. That still leaves us short, Janet pointed out. Then we get creative, Audrey said. Crowdfunding, grant writing, pre-sales to boutiques. We make this work because we have to. Over the next 3 days, the town transformed. The cooperative went from impossible idea to urgent mission. The diner became an unofficial headquarters where people gathered to plan and dream and argue about details. Audrey found herself at the center of it, using every skill she'd acquired in corporate America, but for opposite purposes. She wrote a business plan on Elizabeth's ancient computer, pecking at keys that stuck and a screen that flickered. Tom and the technical team provided production estimates. Janet developed quality standards that exceeded anything corporate had ever demanded. David created repair schedules that would bring the mill back to life in stages, focusing on profitable production first. We could be operational in 6 weeks, David announced at one of their planning sessions. Not at full capacity, but enough to start filling orders. What orders? Someone asked. The ones I'm going to get, Audrey said. I still have contacts in New York boutique owners and designers who value authentic American manufacturing. They don't know I've gone native yet. Gone native? Tom repeated. Is that what you've done? She looked around the room at these people she'd come to destroy, who were now trusting her to help rebuild. At Lyndon, who was juggling Clara's treatment schedule with 18-hour days at the mill. At Elizabeth, who was quietly liquidating a lifetime of savings. At Clara herself, who'd started a penny drive at her hospital, convincing other sick kids to contribute to saving the castle. Yes, Audrey said simply. I've gone native. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah Chen's mother, who'd been silent at every meeting, suddenly stood up and announced in broken English that she had $30,000 hidden in her mattress. From nail salon, she said, 20 years cash business, for Sarah's children college, but no college if no town yes. Her declaration opened floodgates. Others came forward with hidden savings, coffee cans buried in backyards, life insurance policies cashed in. The immigrant families were especially generous, perhaps understanding better than anyone what it meant to invest everything in hope. Audrey watched it all with a mixture of awe and shame. These people who had so little were risking everything, while she'd spent her career helping people who had everything take even more. On the 4th day, Marcus Chen called back. I've reviewed your proposal, he said. It's insane. I know. The financials barely work. I know. The market challenges are significant. I know. We'll provide $75,000 in convertible debt, terms to be negotiated but favorable, on one condition. What? You personally oversee the transition, minimum 2-year commitment. Audrey looked out the window at Clara and Lyndon building a snow fort in the yard, their laughter carrying through the glass. 2 years. In New York, she'd never committed to anything for 2 years, not an apartment, not a relationship, certainly not a mission. Deal, sir, she said. The town erupted in celebration when she announced the funding. People hugged and cried and immediately started planning. The mill would live. Different, transformed, but alive. But even in the celebration, Audrey couldn't forget the other timeline running parallel to their victory. Clara's declining health, the treatment she couldn't afford, the dragon that was winning more days than it was losing. That night, unable to sleep, she found Lyndon sitting on the porch, despite the cold, staring at the stars. Can't sleep either, she asked, joining him. Thinking about time. How little we have, how much we waste. Clara, she had a seizure today, while you were on the phone with the fund. Small one, but they're starting. That means we're entering the final phase unless we can get the experimental treatment. How long? 6 months, maybe 8. They sat in silence, their breath visible in the frigid air. Inside the house was warm and full of life. Outside, the world was frozen and full of endings. I'm going to make some calls, Audrey said, to people I swore I'd never speak to again. There has to be a way. You've already done so much. I haven't done nearly enough. Not yet. She went inside and borrowed Elizabeth's phone, again dialing numbers she'd deleted from her phone months ago, but never from her memory. Former clients, business school classmates, anyone who might have connections to medical charities or pharmaceutical companies. Most didn't answer. Those who did were politely dismissive. Audrey Royce had burned bridges when she quit so dramatically, but she kept calling, each rejection making her more determined. Finally, at 3 a.m, she reached Helena Morrison, wife of the CEO whose acquisition Dalton had stolen. Helena had always liked Audrey, found her refreshingly honest in a world of corporate facades. Audrey, do you have any idea what time it is? I'm sorry, Helena. I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. She explained about Clara, about the treatment, about the impossible cost. Helena listened without interrupting. The Morrison Foundation, Helena said finally. We fund experimental treatments for pediatric cancers. It's Gerald's passion project. His sister died of leukemia when she was 9. Send me the medical records. No promises, but we'll review it. After hanging up, Audrey sat in Elizabeth's kitchen, hope and exhaustion warring in her chest. She thought about the strange path that had led her here, from corporate killer to small-town savior, from destroying a mill to rebuilding it from isolation to something that felt dangerously like family. The next morning brought new challenges. Corporate had sent a new team to assess the damage, led by Dalton Creed himself. He arrived in a black SUV, stepping fastidiously around the slush in his Italian leather shoes. Audrey said, he said when he found her at the mill, surrounded by workers preparing their cooperative proposal. I heard you'd gone native. I had to see it for myself. Hello, Dalton. He looked around with barely concealed disgust. You gave up everything for this, for them. I gave up nothing that mattered. You're delusional. The board will never approve selling to a worker cooperative. They'll demolish this place first. Not if the liability exceeds the land value. I've had David document every environmental issue, every safety violation corporate ignored. The cleanup costs alone, you wouldn't dare. I would. I will. Unless you sell to the cooperative for a fair price. They stared at each other, former colleagues, now on opposite sides of a war Audrey had never imagined fighting. You've lost yourself, Dalton said finally. No, she replied. Looking at Lyndon, teaching Clara to use a level on a partially repaired wall, at Elizabeth, organizing the women into a quilting circle that would produce goods for the mill's boutique line, at all these people working together toward something bigger than themselves. I found myself. Dalton left without signing anything, but Audrey knew she'd won. The environmental report alone would cost corporate millions. They'd sell. That afternoon, while helping clear debris from the main floor, Audrey found something that stopped her cold, a time capsule buried in a wall that had collapsed. Inside were photographs and documents from the mill's founding in 1871, including a daguerreotype of the original workers. At the bottom was a letter to those who come after. This mill was built not for profit, but for purpose, to give good work to good people, to build a community that might endure beyond any one of us. If you're reading this, the mill still stands. Honor what it was by making it what it needs to be. The threads we spin connect past to future. Do not let them break. She showed it to Lyndon, who read it twice before speaking. It's like they knew, he said, like they were writing to us. Maybe every generation faces this choice: preserve or profit, community or capital. Which did you always choose before? You know which. And now? She looked at him, this man who'd saved her life in more ways than one, and felt something shift in her chest, tectonic plates of the heart rearranging themselves. Now I choose this. Clara appeared, moving slowly but steadily, carrying a hammer that was almost as big as she was. Miss Audrey, can you help me? I want to put my drawing up in the new office. The drawing showed all of them, her family, the workers, and Audrey herself standing in front of a restored mill with a rainbow overhead. At the bottom, in careful childish letters, she'd written, "The castle stands." It's perfect, Audrey set her throat tight. Let's find the best spot. As they worked together to hang the picture, Audrey's borrowed phone rang. It was Helena Morrison. The Foundation reviewed Clara's case. We're approving full funding for the experimental treatment. The team at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia is expecting you next week. Audrey's legs nearly gave out. She handed the phone to Lyndon, unable to speak. His face went through a journey of emotions as he listened: disbelief, joy, gratitude, and finally tears. Clara looked between them, confused. What's wrong? Did something bad happen? No baby. Lyndon managed. Something good. Something very good. The dragon, she asked, understanding in the way children do. We found a new sword to fight it with. That evening, the entire town gathered at the mill. Not for planning this time, but for celebration. Someone had brought speakers and Christmas lights. The immigrant families brought food from their cultures: Vietnamese, faux Mexican tamales, Polish pierogies. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds. Tom raised a beer bottle in a toast. To second chances. To community, Janet added. To fighting dragons, why, Claire said, and everyone laughed and cried at the same time. Audrey stood with Lyndon at the edge of the celebration, watching their neighbors dance in the space where machines would soon hum again. Thank you, he said simply, for everything. I should be thanking you. A week ago, I had a career, an apartment, a six-figure salary. Now I have none of those things. Regrets. She watched Clara teaching other children a complicated clapping game, Elizabeth organizing the older women into planning committees, the workers discussing production schedules with the enthusiasm of people who finally owned their own destiny. Not one, she said, and meant it. The drive to Philadelphia Children's Hospital took place on a Tuesday morning that sparkled with frost. Lyndon's truck moved carefully through the pre-dawn darkness while Clara slept in the back seat, wrapped in the quilt Elizabeth had insisted they take, one that had been in the family for 4 generations. Audrey sat in the passenger seat, holding a folder thick with medical documents and insurance papers from the Morrison Foundation. You don't have to come, Lyndon had said for the 3rd time as they loaded the truck. Try to stop me, she'd replied, and something in her tone made him simply nod and hand her Clara's favorite stuffed rabbit to pack. The hospital rose against the morning sky like a beacon of hope and fear combined. Clara woke as they pulled into the parking garage, her face pale but determined. Is this where we fight the dragon for real? She asked. This is where we get the best sword, Lyndon told her, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The next hours blurred together in a symphony of forms and tests and consultations. Dr. Patel, the lead oncologist for the experimental treatment, was a small woman with kind eyes and hands that moved with absolute precision as she examined Clara. The treatment is aggressive, she explained in her office while Clara was getting blood drawn. CAR T-cell therapy combined with a new immunotherapy protocol. We're essentially teaching her body to fight the cancer itself. The success rate is 70% in cases like Clara's. 70%, Lyndon repeated as if tasting the number. Those are good odds, Audrey said, squeezing his shoulder. The side effects can be severe, Dr. Patel continued. Cytokine storms, neurological symptoms. She'll need to stay here for at least 3 weeks for the initial treatment, then regular follow-ups for months. Whatever it takes, Lyndon said immediately. While they discussed logistics, Audrey's mind was already working through the practicalities. 3 weeks in Philadelphia meant Lyndon couldn't work at the mill during its crucial reopening phase. It meant expenses beyond the treatment, lodging, food, gas, lost wages. I'll handle the mill, she said. Tom and Janet can manage production. I'll oversee the business side. Audrey, you can't. I can and I will. This is what partners do. The word hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than she'd intended. Partners in business, yes, but something else was growing between them, delicate as frost and just as liable to melt under too much scrutiny. Claire was admitted that afternoon to a room that tried too hard to be cheerful, with painted murals of forests and fairy tales. She took it all in stride, arranging her drawings on the windowsill and informing the nurses that her daddy was a hero who saved people from storms. Is that so? Asked a nurse named Monica, charmed by Clara's matter-of-fact tone. He saved Ms. Audrey from the blizzard. Now she's helping save our whole town. It's like a circle, see? That evening, while Clara slept off the exhaustion of the day's tests, Audrey and Lyndon sat in the hospital cafeteria picking at food that tasted like worry. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up, Lyndon said, that this is all a dream. The treatment, the mill, you being here. I'm real, Audrey said. This is real. Why are you doing this? Really? You barely knew us 2 weeks ago. She thought about how to answer, how to explain the transformation that had occurred in that frozen mill in Elizabeth's warm kitchen in watching him choose kindness even when the world had given him every reason to choose bitterness. Because 2 weeks ago I was sleepwalking through life. You woke me up. I think it was the storm that woke you up. No, she said firmly. It was you. The way you saw me not as the enemy, not as the destroyer, but as someone who could change. No one's ever given me that before. He reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers were rough from work, warm against her skin. You gave yourself that. I just held the lantern while you found the way. They were interrupted by Audrey's phone, a new one she'd bought to coordinate the mill reopening. Tom's voice was panicked on the other end. We've got a problem. The state inspector showed up today, says we need additional permits for the cooperative structure. Could delay us by months. Put him on speaker at tomorrow's meeting, Audrey said, her corporate instincts kicking in. I'll handle it remotely. How? He seems pretty set on following every regulation to the letter. Then we'll follow them faster than he's ever seen. Send me all the paperwork tonight. I'll have it completed by morning. She spent that night in the hospital's family lounge, laptop open, navigating bureaucracy with the same intensity she'd once used to destroy companies. By dawn, she'd completed 17 forms, scheduled 3 inspections, and found a loophole that would allow them to begin limited production while waiting for final approvals. Clara's treatment began that morning. They wheeled her away at 8 o'clock sharp, and Lyndon aged 10 years in the 3 hours she was gone. Audrey sat with him in the waiting room, not speaking, just present. Sometimes that was all you could do, be present for someone else's unbearable moments. When Clara came back groggy but smiling, she asked if they'd gotten the dragon. First round, the doctor said. The dragon's going to fight back, but we're ready for it. And fight back it did. By the 3rd day, Clara was fevering as her body reacted to the treatment. She shook with chills, then burned with heat. Lyndon never left her side, reading stories, singing songs, applying cool cloths to her forehead. Daddy, she said during a lucid moment, if I don't get better... You will, he said firmly. But if I don't promise you'll still help the mill, promise you'll be happy. Clara, promise. I promise, baby, but you're going to get better. You're the strongest person I know. Stronger than the dragon. So much stronger. Audrey watched from the doorway, her heart breaking and rebuilding itself simultaneously. She'd sat through $1,000 dinners and $1 million deals, but she'd never witnessed anything as valuable as this, a father's love distilled to its purest form. On the 4th day, while Clara slept, Lyndon finally agreed to take a break. Audrey drove him to a nearby park, where they walked among bare trees and winter-quiet paths. I can't lose her, he said suddenly. She's all I have left of Marie. Tell me about her. Marie. She was... light. That's the only way I can describe her. She made everything brighter just by being there. We met in high school. She was new in town from California. Thought Greyhaven was the most boring place on earth until I showed her the hidden waterfall up on the mountain. She said she fell in love with me right there, watching me explain why our boring little town was actually magic. It is magic, Audrey said. I see that now. Marie would have liked you. She always said I needed someone who could match my stubbornness. Is that what I do, match your stubbornness? He stopped walking and looked at her. Really looked at her. You exceed it, in the best possible way. Back at the hospital, Clara's fever had broken. She was weak but alert, asking for ice cream and complaining that the hospital TV didn't have her favorite shows. Dr. Patel called it a good sign her body was responding to the treatment. Meanwhile, in Greyhaven, the mill was coming alive. Audrey coordinated everything from the hospital, her phone constantly buzzing with questions and updates. The first production line was nearly ready. Orders were coming in from boutiques intrigued by the cooperative's story. The local news had picked up the tale, and suddenly everyone wanted to know about the town that had saved itself. You're doing it, Lyndon said one evening, watching her juggle 3 different calls about shipping logistics. We're doing it, she corrected. All of us. But you're the one making it work. You're the bridge between what we know and what we need to learn. Then let me teach you, she said, so you don't need a bridge anymore. They spent the following evenings going over business plans, financial projections, marketing strategies. Lyndon was a quick learner, his practical intelligence absorbing concepts that would have taken MBAs months to grasp. Clara, feeling better each day, would add her own observations. You should make something with unicorns, she suggested seriously. Everyone loves unicorns. Unicorns it is, Audrey agreed, making a note. Limited edition unicorn pattern fabric. We'll call it the Clara Collection. Really? Really? Clara beamed, then grew serious. Ms. Audrey, are you going to stay? After the mill is fixed and I'm better. It was the question Audrey had been avoiding, the one that lurked beneath every plan and projection. Her commitment to Marcus Chen's fund was for 2 years, but what then? Back to New York, to another life of hostile takeovers and empty victories. I don't know, she said honestly. Would you want me to? Yes, Clara said immediately. Daddy smiles more when you're around, and Grandma Liz says you're good for us. She does. She says you're like a grafted branch on an old tree, different, but making the whole thing stronger. From the mouths of babes, Audrey thought, or in this case, from the mouths of wise grandmothers speaking through brave children. The second week of treatment was harder. Clara developed what Dr. Patel called cytokine release syndrome, her immune system overreacting to the therapy. She spiked fevers that had nurses running her small body shaking with rigors that made Lyndon weep in the hallway where she couldn't see. This is normal, Dr. Patel assured them. It means the treatment is working. Her body is fighting. Normal had never seemed so terrifying. Audrey found herself praying for the first time since childhood, not to any specific god, but to whatever force might be listening. Let her live. Let this brave, bright child live. On the worst night, when Clara's temperature hit 104 and she was delirious talking to people who weren't there, Audrey held Lyndon in the family lounge while he sobbed. I can't do this, he said against her shoulder. I'm not strong enough. You are, she said firmly. You're the strongest man I know, and you're not doing it alone. I'm here. The whole town is here in spirit. We're all fighting this dragon with you. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes red and swollen. Why does it feel like you've always been here, like you were meant to find us in that storm? Maybe I was, she said and kissed him. It wasn't a romantic movie kiss, nothing choreographed or perfect. It was desperate and sad and hopeful, all at once, tasting of hospital coffee and tears. It was two people finding each other in the midst of potential loss, holding on to whatever light they could find. I'm falling in love with you, he said when they broke apart. I shouldn't not now, not with everything so uncertain, but I am. Good, she said, because I'm falling in love with you too. Have been since you shared your thermos in that freezing mill. They sat together through the night, taking turns checking on Clara, watching her fight her impossible battle with a courage that humbled them both. By morning, her fever had broken again. She opened her eyes and asked for orange juice and her drawing pad. The dragon's getting tired, she announced with certainty. I can feel it. Dr. Patel confirmed that the treatment was working. Clara's white blood cell counts were improving. The cancer markers were dropping. We're not out of the woods, she warned, but we're on the right path. The third week brought stability and even moments of joy. Clara was able to walk the halls, her IV pole decorated with ribbons she'd made from medical tape. She befriended other children on the ward, organizing a parade of pediatric patients that had the nurses laughing and crying simultaneously. During this time, news came from Greyhaven that lifted everyone's spirits. The first production run had been completed successfully. Tom sent a video of fabric rolling off the line workers cheering as each yard passed inspection. The quality was exceptional, exceeding even the boutique's high standards. We did it, Janet said over video call. First order shipped today. 12 more in the queue. That's my mill, Clara shouted at the phone. That's my daddy's work. But the best news came from an unexpected source. Dalton Creed called Audrey personally, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. The board approved the sale, he said. Congratulations, you've won. We've won, Audrey corrected. Don't expect any favors in the future. You're persona non grata in corporate circles. I wasn't expecting to return to those circles. Then what are you expecting Audrey to play small-town savior forever? You'll be bored within a year. She looked through the window at Lyndon and Clara working on a puzzle together, their heads bent close, occasionally laughing at something only they understood. I don't think I will, she said, and hung up. The sale terms were better than they'd hoped. The environmental liability had scared corporate badly. The cooperative would own the mill outright within 5 years, with payments structured to match projected revenues. It was still a risk, but a manageable one. Clara was discharged on a Thursday morning that felt like the first day of spring despite the February date. She walked out on her own, 2 feet weak, but determined, carrying a certificate from the nurses declaring her bravest dragon fighter in Philadelphia. The drive home was quiet, all of them exhausted from 3 weeks of battle. But as they crested the hill above Greyhaven and saw the mill in the distance, smoke rising from its stack for the first time in months, Clara let out a whoop of joy. It's alive! The castle is alive! The entire town seemed to be waiting at Lyndon's house. Elizabeth had organized a welcome home party, complete with banners and Clara's favorite foods. The child was passed from arm to arm, everyone needing to verify for themselves that she was really there, really improving. You did it, Elizabeth said to Audrey privately. You brought them both home. The treatment brought Clara home. I'm not talking about the treatment. Lyndon's been lost since Marie died. Functioning, yes, but not living. You brought him back to life. He did the same for me. Elizabeth smiled, the knowing smile of a woman who'd seen enough of life to recognize the real thing when it appeared. Then you're even. That's a good place to start. The next days were a whirlwind of activity. Clara had to return to Philadelphia weekly for follow-up treatments, but these were outpatient visits manageable with planning. The mill was hiring back workers, training them not just as employees but as owners. Audrey conducted workshops on financial literacy, helping everyone understand what it meant to be part of a cooperative. When we profit, you profit, she explained at one session. When we grow, you decide how. This isn't just a job anymore, it's your business. Our business, Tom corrected. You're one of us now whether you like it or not. She did like it, more than she'd ever thought possible. The work was harder than anything she'd done in Manhattan. Longer hours, smaller rewards, constant challenges. But it was real in a way her corporate life had never been. When fabric came off the line, she could touch it. When workers got their first profit-sharing check, she could see their joy. When Clara rang the bell at the hospital, indicating another successful treatment, she could hear hope itself. Spring arrived slowly, then all at once. The snow melted, revealing damage, but also resilience. Gardens that had seemed dead pushed up green shoots. The mill's broken windows were replaced with energy-efficient ones. The collapsed west wing was cleared, the space transformed into an outdoor market where local artisans could sell their wares. Audrey moved out of the bed and breakfast where she'd been staying and into a small apartment above the old general store. It was a far cry from her Manhattan high-rise, but it had character-exposed beams, original hardwood floors, and a view of both the mill and the mountains beyond. It's tiny. Marcus, her assistant. Marcus, who'd come to visit and check on her sanity, observed with barely concealed horror. It's perfect, she countered, showing him the reading nook she'd created, the desk where she worked on mill business, the kitchen where she was learning to cook actual meals instead of surviving on takeout. You've really changed, he said, and it wasn't entirely a compliment. Yes, she agreed. I have. He didn't stay long. The town made him nervous, all that community and connection. He belonged to the world of surfaces and transactions, and she realized with some surprise that she no longer spoke that language fluently. The Clara collection launched in April, featuring fabric printed with unicorns drawn by Clara herself. It sold out within a week. Orders poured in from boutiques across the country, all wanting to be part of the story, the mill saved by its workers, the child who fought cancer and won the corporate executive who chose community over career. We're going to need to expand, Janet said at a planning meeting. This is more demand than we can meet with current capacity. Then we expand carefully, Audrey said. We don't sacrifice quality for quantity. We don't forget who we are in pursuit of who we could be. It was a lesson she'd learned the hard way, and she was determined not to let the cooperative repeat her mistakes. Clara's health continued to improve. By May, her scans were clear, no evidence of disease. Dr. Patel called it a complete response, though she warned they'd need to monitor for years to be sure. "The dragon's gone," Claire announced to anyone who would listen. "We beat it with science and love and everyone helping." "That's exactly how we beat it." Lyndon agreed, his arm around Audrey as they watched Clara play in the yard with other children, her energy returning bit by bit. They were together now officially, though in a small town, nothing had ever been unofficial. Everyone had seen it coming before they had Elizabeth most of all. "About time," she'd said when Lyndon told her. "I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in a room until you figured it out." Their relationship was built on shared struggle and mutual respect, on long discussions about the mill's future and quiet evenings reading while Clara drew. It wasn't the whirlwind romance of movies, but something deeper, more rooted. "I never expected this," Audrey told him one night as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the humid air. "Any of it. The mill, the town, you and Clara." Disappointed. Grateful. Grateful beyond words. He pulled her closer and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady heartbeat that had become her favorite sound. "Clara asked me something yesterday," he said. "She wanted to know if you were going to be her new mom." Audrey's breath caught. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that was something we all had to decide together when the time was right, but that whatever happened, you weren't going anywhere." "No," she agreed. "I'm not going anywhere." The mill's first year as a cooperative exceeded all projections. They paid back the initial loans, distributed profits to worker owners, and even created an emergency fund for families facing medical crises. The model attracted attention from other dying industrial towns, and Audrey found herself consulting, helping other communities attempt their own resurrections. "You're becoming famous," Lyndon teased after she was featured in a major business magazine article titled "The Executive Who Chose Main Street Over Wall Street." "Infamous, more like it. My old colleagues think I've lost my mind." "Have you?" She looked around the mill office, now bright and clean and humming with activity. Through the window, she could see Clara helping Elizabeth in the garden they'd planted on the site of the collapsed wing. Tom and Janet were arguing good-naturedly about production schedules. The sound of machinery was no longer death rattles, but life songs. "No," she said. "I found it." Summer brought the first Greyhaven Festival in 5 years, celebrating the mill's rebirth and Clara's recovery. The whole town transformed, bunting across Main Street, food trucks in the park, local bands on a makeshift stage. The mill offered tours showing visitors how American textile manufacturing could thrive with the right model. Audrey found herself at the center of it all, coordinating vendors, managing logistics skills from her corporate life repurposed for community building. But the best moment came when Clara took the stage to thank everyone who'd helped save both her and the mill. "Sometimes bad things happen," she said in her clear child's voice, "like storms and sickness and mills closing. But if people help each other, good things can come from bad things, like Miss Audrey coming to our town, like my daddy smiling again, like all of you having jobs you own instead of jobs someone can take away." The crowd erupted in applause, and Audrey felt tears streaming down her face. This 7-year-old understood more about economics and community than she'd learned in business school. As the sun set over the festival, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Lyndon found Audrey standing alone by the mill, just watching it all. "Penny, for your thoughts." "Just thinking about storms," she said. "How that blizzard was the worst and best thing that ever happened to me." Elizabeth would say it was meant to be, that the storm came to teach us all something. "What did it teach you?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "That sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what everything really means. That strength isn't about standing alone, but standing together. That love isn't a luxury, but a necessity. And that janitors can save CEOs. Former CEOs," he corrected with a smile. "And yes, that too." Clara ran up to them, sparklers in both hands, her face glowing with health and happiness. "Look, Mr. Tom gave me fire sticks." "Carefully, baby," Lyndon warned, but he was laughing. "I'm always careful, except when I'm brave." She danced away, trailing light through the gathering darkness, And Audrey thought she'd never seen anything more beautiful than this child who'd faced death and chosen joy, this man who'd lost everything and chosen hope, this town that had been abandoned and chosen to save itself. "Marry me," she said suddenly. Lyndon turned to stare at her. "What?" "Marry me. Here in this town with these people in the shadow of this mill we saved together." "Audrey, I know it's fast. I know we should probably wait, be sensible, make 5-year plans. But I've spent my whole life being sensible, and it led me away from everything that mattered. I don't want to waste any more time. You know what you're signing up for? Small town life. A ready-made family workers meetings instead of board meetings. I know exactly what I'm signing up for. The question is, will you have me?" Instead of answering, he kissed her there in the middle of the festival with the whole town watching, and the cheer that went up could probably be heard in Philadelphia. "Is that a yes?" she asked when they broke apart. "That's a—" "Clara already picked out her dress, and Elizabeth has been planning the menu for weeks," he said. "So yes, absolutely yes." They married in September when the leaves were just beginning to turn, and Clara's latest scans showed continued remission. The ceremony was held at the mill, of course, with the entire town in attendance. Audrey wore her grandmother's dress hastily shipped from storage, altered by the mill's seamstresses. Lyndon wore his father's suit, carefully preserved by Elizabeth for just such an occasion. Clara served as both flower girl and best girl, distributing petals and rings with equal seriousness. Tom walked Audrey down the aisle, grumbling about his allergies when tears appeared. Elizabeth officiated, having gotten certified online specifically for this purpose. "You came here to close this mill," Elizabeth said during the ceremony. "Instead, you opened your heart. You came to end something, and instead you began everything. That's the mystery of love. It transforms destruction into creation, endings into beginnings." When they kissed, sealing their union. The mill whistle blew for the first time in years, a sound that echoed off the mountains and seemed to say, "We survive, we endure, we thrive." The reception was a potluck affair, everyone contributing something, the tables groaning under the weight of community love made edible. There were speeches that went too long, and jokes that weren't quite funny, and children running everywhere, and it was perfect in its imperfection. "No regrets?" Lyndon asked as they danced to a local band's enthusiastic, if slightly off-key, rendition of their chosen song. "Only one," Audrey said. "I wish it hadn't taken a blizzard to bring me here." "But it did," Claire interrupted, dancing between them. "And that's what makes it a good story. The storm, and the dragon, and the castle, and now the happily ever after." "Is that what this is?" Audrey asked, lifting Clara into their dance. "Happily ever after." "No," Clara said, with the wisdom of a child who'd learned too young that nothing is permanent. "It's happily right now, and now, and now, and if we're lucky, lots and lots of nows." As the stars came out over Greyhaven, over the mill that wouldn't die and the people who wouldn't give up, Audrey thought Clara was right. No promises of forever, just this moment, these people, this choice to build rather than destroy. The closer had become the opener, opening hearts and possibilities and futures that hadn't existed before a storm taught her what really mattered. The first winter after their wedding arrived, gentler than the one that had brought them together, but it still carried challenges that tested their newfound stability. Audrey stood in the mill office, now properly heated and organized, reviewing orders that should have made her happy. Instead, she frowned at the numbers, a familiar unease creeping up her spine. "That's your worried face," Lyndon observed from the doorway, coffee in hand. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong? That's what's wrong." She turned the laptop screen toward him. "Orders are up 40%. The boutiques want exclusive lines. There's a major retailer interested in carrying our products nationwide. And this is bad because I've seen this before. Success becomes expansion, becomes overreach, becomes collapse. It's the American business cycle, and I helped perpetuate it for years." Lyndon set down the coffee and pulled up a chair beside her. Marriage had taught them to read each other's anxieties like familiar maps. "But we're different. We're cooperative. We make decisions together. Do we, or do we just follow my lead because I'm the one with the business degree?" It was a fair question, one that had been lurking beneath their success. The workers trusted Audrey, but sometimes that trust felt too automatic, too deferential. She'd left the corporate world, but had she really left its hierarchies behind? "Let's call a meeting," Lyndon suggested. "Full cooperative. Put everything on the table." The meeting that night was contentious in a way their gatherings hadn't been before. Success, it turned out, was harder to navigate than crisis. Tom wanted to accept every order, maximize profit while they could. Janet worried about quality suffering if they grew too fast. David insisted they needed equipment upgrades before any expansion. The newer workers hired as the cooperative grew felt their voices weren't being heard equally with the founding members. "We're becoming what we fought against," said Marcus Kim, one of the younger workers, "a few people making decisions for everyone else." The words stung because they held truth. Audrey had been so focused on keeping the mill profitable that she'd inadvertently recreated the very power structures she'd once wielded in Manhattan. "You're right," she said, surprising everyone, including herself. "I've been managing instead of collaborating. Old habits." "It's not just you," Tom admitted. "We've gotten comfortable letting you lead because it's easier than figuring things out together." Elizabeth, who rarely spoke at meetings but always attended, stood slowly. "My grandfather helped build this mill. He used to say that a mill is like a marriage. It only works when everyone pulls their weight and no one pulls rank. Maybe it's time we remembered that." They restructured that night, creating committees for different aspects of the business, rotating leadership roles, ensuring the newest voices were heard alongside the founding members. It was messy and inefficient and exactly what they needed. Clara, who'd been quietly drawing in the corner, presented her latest creation at meeting's end. It showed the mill as a tree with many branches, each one different, but all growing from the same trunk. "That's us," she announced. "All different, but all together." "When did you get so wise?" Audrey asked, pulling her into a hug. "Wednesdays," Claire replied seriously, making everyone laugh. The restructuring revealed unexpected talents. Marcus Kim, the young worker who challenged them, turned out to have a gift for social media marketing. Sarah Chen's mother, despite her limited English, had an intuitive understanding of inventory management that put Audrey's spreadsheets to shame. Even Quiet David emerged as a natural teacher, training new workers with patience and precision. But the real test came when the major retailer Brennan sent representatives to tour the mill. They arrived in black SUVs, reminding Audrey uncomfortably of her own arrival less than 2 years ago. The lead representative, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Wells, walked through the facility with the calculating eyes Audrey recognized from her mirror's past reflection. "Impressive operation," Patricia said over lunch at the local diner. "We could move 50,000 units in the first quarter alone." "We can't produce 50,000 units," Janet said flatly. "Not without compromising quality." "Then expand. We can provide capital equipment loans, transform this quaint operation into something serious." "This is serious," Tom interjected. "Just because we're small doesn't mean Mr. Brennan." Patricia interrupted. "I'm offering you the chance to go national, to make real money. Isn't that what you want?" "What we want," Audrey said carefully, "is to maintain our values while growing sustainably. Can Brennan's work with that?" Patricia's smile was sharp as winter ice. "Ms. Royce, or should I say Mrs. Callum, now I know who you were. The closer. You understand how this works. Growth or death. There's no middle ground in American business." "Then we'll create one," Clara said from the doorway where she'd been listening. She walked in with confidence that belied her 8 years. "You want our stuff because it's special. It's special because we make it with love. If we make it without love, just to make more, it won't be special anymore. Then you won't want it. That's called killing the golden goose. I read about it." Patricia stared at the child, then laughed, but it wasn't mocking. "You've got a point, kid, but love doesn't scale." "Sure it does," Clara replied. "It just scales differently." That night the cooperative voted, not on whether to accept Brennan's offer that was unanimously rejected, but on how to grow without losing themselves. They decided to partner with other struggling mills, teaching the cooperative model, creating a network rather than an empire. "Horizontal growth instead of vertical," Audrey explained to Lyndon later as they walked through the town square now decorated for Christmas. "We spread out rather than up. Like roots," he said. stronger than towers. When did you become the poet in this relationship? Tuesdays, he replied, echoing Clara's joke, and they laughed together in the cold air that sparkled with frost. The first partner mill was in West Virginia, a furniture factory on the verge of closure. Audrey and a team of worker owners spent a week there teaching what they'd learned, helping structure the cooperative, sharing their mistakes as freely as their successes. You're creating competitors, Patricia Wells said when she called to make one last pitch. You realize that, right? We're creating community, Audrey corrected. Competition assumes scarcity. Community assumes abundance. You really have gone native? The best thing that ever happened to me. Clara's health remained stable through the winter, her quarterly scans showing no return of the dragon, as she called it. But in February, during a routine checkup, Dr. Patel found something concerning. It's not cancer, she said quickly, seeing their faces, but Clara's immune system is still recovering from the treatment. There's an infection in her lungs. Treatable, but it needs aggressive antibiotics. Hospital stay probably 2 weeks. The drive back to Philadelphia was quiet, Clara. Between them in the truck's front seat, they'd removed the center console to make room for 3, holding both their hands. I'm not scared, she announced. We beat the dragon. This is just a cold. A cold with attitude, Lyndon agreed, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The hospital stay stretched to 3 weeks when Clara developed a reaction to the first antibiotic. Audrey and Lyndon took turns at her bedside, one always with Clara, while the other managed the mill remotely. The cooperative stepped up, handling daily operations without them proving the resilience of the structure they'd built. It was during the 3rd week late at night, while Clara slept and Lyndon dozed in the chair, that Audrey felt the first flutter. She placed her hand on her stomach, wondering if she'd imagined it. Then it came again, butterfly wings from within. She was pregnant. They'd talked about it, of course. Clara wanted siblings had been drawing pictures of babies for months. But with Clara's health still fragile and the mill still finding its footing, they'd decided to wait. Life apparently had other plans. She didn't tell Lyndon that night or the next. Clara needed their full attention as she fought the infection. But when Clara finally turned the corner, when her laughter returned and she started complaining about hospital food, Audrey knew it was time. I have something to tell you both, she said one evening as they watched the sunset from Clara's room, about our family. Are we getting a dog? Clara asked immediately. I've been very responsible with my medications. I deserve a dog. Not a dog, a baby. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Clara shrieked with joy and Lyndon's face went through a symphony of emotions, shock, fear, wonder, and finally, incandescent happiness. When, he managed, October if my math is right. A Halloween baby, Clara exclaimed. That's perfect. We can dress it up as a pumpkin. It, Lyndon laughed. The baby is not an it. It is until we know if it's a brother or sister, Clara said practically. Then more quietly. The baby won't get sick like me, will it? No, sweetheart, Audrey assured her. Your illness isn't genetic. The baby will be fine. Good, because I'm going to teach it everything. How to draw dragons and fight storms and save mills. They brought Clara home on a Thursday that felt like spring's first whisper. The town had organized another welcome, smaller this time, but no less warm. Elizabeth had knitted baby booties that she presented with a knowing smile. I knew before you did. She claimed, and nobody doubted her. The pregnancy changed the rhythms of their life. Audrey found herself moving slower, thinking longer term. The mill's success felt less like a goal to achieve and more like a foundation to build on. She started a program for young people teaching business skills to high schoolers who might otherwise leave Greyhaven for opportunities elsewhere. You're nesting, Lyndon observed one evening, finding her reorganizing the supply closet for the 3rd time. I'm optimizing. You're nesting, and it's adorable. She threw a roll of paper towels at him, but she was smiling. He was right. She was building a nest not just for their baby, but for their community. The West Virginia mill's transition to a cooperative was successful enough that 3 more mills reached out for help. Audrey created a formal consulting structure with experienced worker owners serving as advisors. They called it the Greyhaven model, though Audrey insisted it should be called the Storm Survivor System. That's terrible branding, Tom laughed. But accurate, Audrey countered.
We all survived our storms. Now we help others survive theirs. Summer arrived with unusual heat, making Audrey's pregnancy more uncomfortable, but also bringing record sales as their lightweight fabrics became sought after. Clara designed a new line of patterns based on her recovery journey. Dragons becoming butterflies, storms becoming rainbows. They sold out in days. "You're going to be a famous artist," Audrey told her. "I'm going to be a big sister first," Clara replied. "That's more important."
The baby shower was naturally a town affair, held at the mill because where else would it be with decorations made from fabric scraps and food provided by every family? Audrey, who'd never imagined herself as the baby shower type, found herself moved to tears repeatedly. Hormones, she claimed, but everyone knew better. Lyndon built a crib in the mill's woodworking shop, each piece carefully crafted during lunch breaks. Clara painted it with tiny dragons and unicorns for protection and magic. Elizabeth provided a quilt made from fabric produced in the mill's first successful run. 5 generations of Callums have slept under handmade quilts, she said. This baby will too. The network of cooperative mills had grown to 12 by late summer, each one learning from the other's experiences. They shared suppliers, coordinated orders, and created a support system that corporate America couldn't understand but couldn't ignore either. "You're reshaping American manufacturing, Nata," Marcus Chen from the Social Impact Fund told Audrey during a site visit. "This could be a model for the whole country." "It's just people helping people," Audrey replied, unconsciously rubbing her growing belly. "Nothing revolutionary about that." "In today's economy, it's the most revolutionary thing there is." As October approached, Audrey found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. 2 years ago, she'd been alone in a Manhattan apartment that cost more per month than most Greyhaven families made in 3. Now she was surrounded by family blood, married and chosen in a town that had become home in ways she'd never imagined possible. "Do you ever miss it?" Lyndon asked one evening as they sat on their porch watching Clara chase fireflies in the yard. "The city, the power, the money." "I miss the good Thai food," she admitted. "But no, I don't miss the life. That wasn't living. It was just performing success. And this—" She looked at Clara, laughing at the mill in the distance, still running second shift at her husband, whose hands built things instead of destroying them at her belly, where new life grew. "This is real." Labor started at the mill, because of course it did. Audrey was in the middle of a production meeting when the first contraction hit. She tried to hide it to finish the discussion about winter fabric lines, but the second one made her grip the table. "Hospital, now," Janet commanded, recognizing the signs. "I have 10 more items on the agenda." "The baby doesn't care about your agenda," Tom said, already calling Lyndon from the floor. The drive to the hospital was a reversal of all their previous trips this time, heading toward medical care with joy rather than fear. Clara sat in the back timing contractions on her phone with scientific precision. 7 minutes apart, she announced. "According to the internet, we have plenty of time." "The internet doesn't know your mother," Lyndon muttered, driving slightly faster. Emma Rose Callum was born at 11:47 p.m. on October 30th, missing Halloween by 13 minutes. Punctual like her mother, Lyndon said, crying as he held his daughter for the first time. She had Audrey's dark hair and Lyndon's green eyes, and Clara declared her absolutely perfect, no improvements needed. The first weeks were a blur of feedings and diapers, and Clara's enthusiastic but not always helpful assistance. The mill ran smoothly without Audrey's daily presence, proof that they'd built something sustainable. "You've made yourself replaceable," Lyndon observed one morning as Audrey fretted about missing a planning meeting. "That was always the goal. No one should be irreplaceable. That's how you build something that lasts." Very wise for someone operating on 2 hours of sleep. "I'm full of surprises." Emma's baptism, held at the mill because tradition was tradition, brought together everyone who'd been part of their journey. Workers who'd almost lost everything, town members who'd invested their savings, the doctors who'd saved Clara, even Marcus Chen from the fund, and surprisingly, Helena Morrison. "I had to see it for myself," Helena said, looking around the transformed mill. "Gerald didn't believe me when I told him what you'd built here." "It's not just what I built." "I know. That's what makes it remarkable." As winter approached again, Audrey found herself standing where it had all begun in the abandoned section where she'd first met Lyndon. It had been renovated, now turned into a community education center where they taught everything from literacy to coding. "Full circle," Lyndon said, finding her there with Emma sleeping in a carrier against his chest. "More like a spiral. Same place, different level. Still getting philosophical on me. Must be Thursday." They stood together, their family of four, in the place where a blizzard had trapped a ruthless executive and a weary janitor, forcing them to see each other as human. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained. "Mom," Clara called from the main floor. "The news people are here. They want to film our story." And another news crew, another version of their tale. But Audrey didn't mind anymore. Let them tell the story of the mill that refused to die, the town that saved itself, the executive who chose community over career. Maybe it would inspire other towns, other mills, other executives to choose differently. "Ready?" Lyndon asked. "Always," Audrey replied, and meant it. They walked toward the lights and cameras, but Audrey's mind was on darker days and colder nights, on a thermos of soup that had saved their lives, and a child's drawings that had saved their souls. The blizzard that had brought them together was just memory now, but its gift, the understanding that success meant survival together, rather than profit alone, would last generations. "Mrs. Callum," the reporter began, "you gave up a successful corporate career to save this mill. Any regrets?" Audrey looked at her husband, her daughters, her workers who were also owners, her community that was also family. Through the window, she could see snow beginning to fall gentle this time, like a benediction. "Just one," she said. "I wish I'd found my way here sooner." But even that wasn't true. The storm had come exactly when it needed to, teaching its lessons to people ready to learn them. Clara had been right all those months ago. It wasn't about happily ever after. It was about happily right now and now. And now each moment building on the last, like fabric coming off the loom, separate threads creating something whole. The interview continued, but Audrey's attention drifted to Emma, stirring in Lyndon's arms, to Clara demonstrating her drawings for the camera, to the steady hum of machinery that sang of purpose rather than profit. She'd come to this town to end something, but instead she'd begun everything that mattered. The reporter asked about future plans, about growth strategies and market projections. Audrey gave the expected answers about sustainable development and cooperative expansion, but her real plans were simpler. Raise her daughters in a place that valued people over profit. Love her husband who'd taught her what strength really meant, and help other communities discover that they too could save themselves. "One last question," the reporter said. "What would you tell other executives considering a similar path?" Audrey thought about all the complicated answers she could give about economic models and social responsibility. But in the end, she said simply, "Sometimes you have to get trapped in a storm to discover you've been lost in the sunshine. And sometimes a janitor with a thermos of soup knows more about wealth than any CEO." The reporter looked confused, but Lyndon squeezed her hand, understanding perfectly. Clara added, "She means love is better than money," with the confidence of a child who'd learned this truth through trials no child should face. As the news crew packed up and the workday continued around them, Audrey stood with her family in the mill that had become their castle, saved not by knights or magic, but by ordinary people choosing extraordinary courage. Through the window, the snow continued falling, but inside was warm and bright and full of the sound of productive work and Emma's baby laughter and Clara's endless questions and Lyndon's steady presence. "Home," Audrey said quietly, the word containing multitudes. "Home," Lyndon agreed and kissed her as Clara made exaggerated gagging noises, and Emma gurgled and the mill hummed its eternal song of transformation thread into fabric strangers, into family and endings, into beginnings. The storm had passed, but what it had created would endure for generations, a testament to the truth that sometimes destruction is just creation, wearing a disguise, waiting for someone brave enough to see through the devastation to the possibility beyond. And in Greyhaven, Pennsylvania, in a mill that refused to die, surrounded by people who refused to give up, Audrey Royce. Callum finally understood what success really meant. It wasn't about closing deals or climbing ladders. It was about opening hearts and building bridges. It was about choosing connection over competition, community over capital. It was about coming in from the cold to find warmth you didn't know you were seeking, and discovering that home isn't a place but a choice you make every day to show up for the people who show up for you. The blizzard had taught her this. Lyndon had shown her this, Clara had proven this, and now Emma would grow up knowing this as surely as she knew her own name. The mill would continue. The town would thrive. And somewhere in another dying town with another closing factory, someone would hear their story and think, if they could do it, so can we. This was Audrey's true legacy, not the companies she'd closed, but the communities she'd helped open to their own possibility. As the family walked through the mill toward home, workers calling out greetings and updates, Audrey felt the rightness of it all settle into her bones. She'd traveled so far to arrive exactly where she needed to be carried by a storm that had seemed like disaster but had actually been deliverance. 3 years had passed since Emma's birth, and the mill now employed twice as many workers as before its resurrection. Audrey stood in what had once been the collapsed West Wing, now transformed into a state-of-the-art training center where young people learned both traditional textile skills and modern business management. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a deliberate choice to flood the space with light, she could see Emma toddling after Clara in the memorial garden they'd planted for all the workers who'd built their lives around this place. Ms. Audrey, a young voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find Miguel Santos Maria's grandson holding a portfolio with nervous hands. At 19, he was part of the first generation to grow up seeing the mill not as a dying giant but as a living proof of possibility. It's just Audrey Miguel, you know that. My grandmother says I should show respect, he said, but smiled. I finished the designs for the heritage line you suggested. She reviewed his sketches. Modern interpretations of traditional patterns found in the mill's archives, each one telling a story of the families who'd worked here. His talent was undeniable, raw, but authentic, exactly what their younger customer base craved. These are extraordinary, Sus, she said, watching his face light up. Clara's going to have competition as our lead designer. Nobody competes with Clara, he laughed. She's already planning the spring collection, and she's only 11. 11. Audrey could barely reconcile the number with the tiny girl who'd fought dragons in a hospital bed. Clara had grown tall like her father, with her mother's fierce determination and a wisdom earned too young but worn with grace. Her latest scans remained clear, 5 years cancer-free, though they'd never stop watching, never stop holding their breath at each appointment. Mama! Emma's voice carried through the window. Mama, look... Audrey moved to the window to see her youngest daughter standing triumphant atop a small hill of mulch arms spread wide like she'd conquered Everest. Lyndon was nearby pretending to be a dragon that Clara was valiantly fighting off with a stick sword, their laughter echoing across the grounds. Your family's something special, Miguel said softly. My grandmother tells stories about the storm, about how Mr. Lyndon saved you, and you saved all of us. She says it was God's plan. Maybe it was, Audrey agreed. Or maybe we just got lucky. Either way, I'm grateful. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janet. Emergency meeting, conference room, now. The conference room, once a break room where workers ate silent lunches between shifts, now hummed with tension. The entire cooperative board was present, faces grim. Tom held a letter like it might explode. What's happened? Audrey asked, though her stomach already knew. In business, good news never required emergency meetings. Brennan's is back, Tom said, but this time they're not trying to partner with us. They're opening their own facility, 20 miles away, automated production. They're offering our workers double wages to jump ship. The room erupted in angry voices. 3 years of success had made them comfortable, maybe too comfortable. They'd forgotten that the corporate world hadn't changed just because they had. How many? Audrey asked quietly. 7 have already given notice, Janet replied. More are considering, can't blame them. Double wages is hard to turn down when you've got kids to feed. We can't match those wages, David added. Not without destroying everything we've built. Audrey felt the familiar cold calculation of her former life sliding back like muscle memory. She could see the chessboard, the moves and counter moves, the ways to fight or fold. But then she looked out the window at her daughters playing and remembered she didn't play that game anymore. We don't match them, she said. We offer something they can't, which is, Tom's skepticism was plain. Ownership, real ownership. Not just profit sharing, but decision making. Every worker who stays becomes a full voting member immediately, not after the usual 2-year waiting period. And we accelerate the transition plan. Anyone who commits to 10 years gets priority consideration for leadership roles. That's a huge risk, Janet pointed out. We could end up with people voting on things they don't understand. Then we teach them to understand. That's what the training center is for. Audrey moved to the whiteboard, her mind racing. Brennan's is offering jobs. We're offering careers. They're offering wages. We're offering wealth building. They're offering to make workers slightly richer. We're offering to make them owners. Will it be enough? David asked. For some, yes. For others, no. But the ones who stay will be the ones who believe in what we're building, and that's worth more than workers who are just here for a paycheck. The meeting stretched into evening, strategizing responses, calculating projections, debating principles. When they finally broke, Audrey found Lyndon waiting in her office with Emma asleep in his arms and Clara doing homework at the desk. Heard about Brennan's, he said simply. News travels fast. It's Grey Haven. News travels before it happens. He shifted Emma's weight, studying his wife's face. You're not worried. I'm terrified, she admitted. But not of losing, of becoming them in order to beat them. Clara looked up from her math. Mom, you could never become them. You know why? Why, sweetheart? Because you have us, and we wouldn't let you. From the mouths of babes. Audrey thought pulling Clara into a hug that turned into a family embrace. Emma stirring just enough to mumble group hug before falling back asleep. Over the next weeks, the defections continued. 12 workers ultimately left for Brennan's, including 2 founding members whose departure felt like personal betrayal. The local news covered it as David versus Goliath, though Audrey pointed out that David had actually won that fight. Details, Tom grumbled, but his heart wasn't in the cynicism anymore. The remaining workers rallied with fierce loyalty. Production actually increased as everyone pushed harder, determined to prove that purpose could compete with profit. Orders continued flowing in, particularly from younger consumers who valued the story behind their purchases. But the real blow came from an unexpected direction. Helena Morrison called on a Thursday evening, her voice carefully neutral. Audrey, I thought you should hear this from me. Gerald is retiring. The board is selling Morrison Industries. The buyer is Brennan's parent company. The words hit like physical blows. Morrison Industries held their largest contracts, nearly 30% of their revenue. They'll cancel our agreements, Audrey said, not a question. Within 6 months, I fought it, but Helena's composure cracked slightly. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. After the call, Audrey sat in her office as darkness fell, staring at spreadsheets that suddenly looked like death sentences. Without Morrison, they'd have to cut production, reduce wages, maybe lay off workers, everything they'd sworn never to do. Mom, Clara's voice from the doorway. Dad sent me to get you for dinner. Not hungry, sweetheart. Clara entered anyway, wise beyond her 11 years, and looked at the numbers on the screen. Is it bad? Yeah, it's bad. Bad like when I was sick, or bad like a regular problem. The perspective check hit hard. Regular problem, bad problem. Then we'll figure it out. We always do. Clara pulled up a chair. Remember what you taught me? Every problem has a solution. We just have to find it. They spent the evening brainstorming Clara's unconventional thinking, sparking ideas Audrey wouldn't have considered. What if they pivoted to direct-to-consumer sales? What if they created their own retail spaces? What if they partnered with other cooperatives to create a distribution network that bypassed traditional retailers entirely? You might be onto something, Audrey said, scribbling notes. A cooperative marketplace, not just textiles, but everything furniture from West Virginia pottery, from North Carolina preserved foods from Vermont. Like a mall, but with meaning, Clara added. Exactly like that. The idea evolved over the following days, shaped by input from the entire cooperative. They would create an online platform and physical spaces, starting with a renovated section of the mill where cooperative-made goods could be sold directly to consumers who valued ethical production. It's ambitious, Marcus Chen said when Audrey pitched it to the fund. Maybe too ambitious. 3 years ago, saving this mill was too ambitious. Now we're thriving. You're surviving. There's a difference. Then help us do more than survive. This could revolutionize how cooperatives reach markets. He was quiet for a long moment. I'll need to see detailed projections, and you'll need other cooperatives committed before we can invest. Give me 30 days. She spent those 30 days on the road, Emma and Clara alternating as travel companions when school allowed visiting cooperatives across the eastern seaboard. Each pitch refined the vision, a network that preserved independence while providing collective strength. In a converted warehouse in Baltimore, she found her first major partner, a furniture cooperative run by formerly homeless veterans. In Burlington, a craft brewery that had been worker-owned for a decade signed on immediately. By day 25, she had 12 commitments and enough momentum to make Marcus take notice. But it was Clara who provided the breakthrough, designing a logo during one of their drives, interconnected circles forming a larger circle, each one distinct but part of the whole. It's like us, V, she explained. All different, but all connected. The design went viral when Miguel posted it on social media with the story of its 11-year-old creator. Orders started coming in before they'd even launched the platform. The media picked up the story, "Child designer helps save American manufacturing." "I'm not saving it," Clara told one reporter with characteristic directness. "I'm just drawing what I see, people helping people. That's all any of this is." The platform launched on the first day of spring, with Elizabeth ringing the mill bell that had announced shifts for over a century. The website crashed within 3 hours from traffic, which Marcus called the best problem to have. Brennan's facility opened the same week, a gleaming automated giant that could produce 10 times what Greyhaven could manage. But their products, while cheap and efficient, lacked the thing that no machine could replicate: StorySoul, the knowledge that human hands had created something with care. "They'll always be able to make it faster and cheaper," Lyndon said, watching trucks roll in and out of the Brennan facility from the hill above town. "Let them," Audrey replied. "We're not competing on their terms anymore." Summer brought unexpected challenges. Emma, now 3 and fearless, managed to break her arm falling from the apple tree she'd been expressly told not to climb. The cooperative's health insurance, hard won through collective bargaining, covered everything. But the incident reminded them how fragile their small utopia remained. "She's got your stubbornness," Lyndon said in the emergency room, Emma sleeping off pain medication with her new pink cast. "And your belief that rules are suggestions," Audrey countered. "A winning combination. A terrifying combination." But Emma's recovery was swift and enthusiastic, her cast becoming a canvas for every worker at the mill to sign or draw something. By the time it came off, it looked like a textile sample book. The cooperative marketplace grew faster than anyone anticipated. By midsummer, they were processing thousands of orders weekly, and the renovated mill section had become a destination for tourists seeking authentic American-made goods. Claire's designs were featured in a major fashion magazine, though she remained more interested in her middle school's art club than fame. Then in August, Dalton Creed reappeared. He stood in the mill's entrance like a specter from another life, his suit immaculate despite the summer heat, his smile sharp as ever. "Audrey, you're looking domestic." "Dalton, you're looking unwelcome." "Is that any way to greet an old colleague? I come bearing opportunities." Against her better judgment, she met him in her office, the space that had once been a janitor's closet transformed into a nerve center of cooperative commerce. He looked around with barely concealed amusement. From corner offices to closets, quite the journey. "What do you want, Dalton?" "Direct as always. Fine. Brennan's is struggling. Turns out automated production can't respond to market trends quickly enough. They need what you have: authenticity, story, the ability to pivot. They want to buy you out." "We're not for sale." "Everything's for sale at the right price. They're offering $20 million. That's roughly $500,000 per worker owner. Life-changing money for these people." It was. For workers who'd started with nothing, $500,000 represented security college for their kids, retirement without fear. The answer is still no. You can't make that decision unilaterally. Isn't this a democracy? He was right, and he knew it. The offer would have to be presented to the cooperative, voted on by every member. And in a town where poverty was generational, $500,000 might be impossible to refuse. The meeting that night was the most difficult they'd ever held.
Audrey presented the offer without commentary, letting the numbers speak for themselves. The room erupted in discussion, some seeing opportunity, others seeing betrayal. "It's enough to start over anywhere," said Marcus Kim, one of the younger workers. "Start over as what?" Tom countered. "Employees again, servants to someone else's dream." "Rich servants," someone muttered. Elizabeth stood slowly, her age showing in the careful movement, but her voice strong as ever. "I've lived through the Depression, 3 wars, and more economic crashes than I can count. Money comes and goes, but once you sell your soul, you don't get it back." "With respect, Mrs. Callum," Marcus said, "souls don't pay for cancer treatment or college tuition." "No," Clara said suddenly, from where she'd been quietly drawing in the corner. "But this mill paid for my cancer treatment, not Brennan's, not some corporation. This family we built." She stood, her drawing in hand. It showed the mill, but not as a building. She'd drawn it as a living thing with roots extending deep into the ground and branches reaching toward the sky, each leaf bearing a worker's face. "If we sell, we're not just selling a building or a business. We're selling this." She held up the drawing. "We're selling us." The vote was closer than Audrey had feared. But in the end, 23 voted to remain independent, 17 to sell. The narrow margin left wounds that would take time to heal. Dalton left with predictions of doom. "You've sentenced them to slow death instead of comfortable life. Very noble, very stupid." But the workers who'd voted to stay did so with renewed commitment. They understood now what they were choosing, not just a job, but a way of life. Not just wages, but belonging. Fall arrived with orders for Clara's winter collection, her designs now bearing a small CRC logo. Clara Rose Callum, the 11-year-old with her own fashion line. The proceeds went into a fund for families facing medical crises. Clara's insistence. "I got help when I needed it," she explained at the fund's launch. "Now I help others. That's how circles work." The cooperative marketplace had expanded to include 37 cooperatives across 12 states. The mill's original building could barely contain the energy of what they'd created. Plans were drawn for expansion, not to grow bigger, but to grow deeper, adding education facilities, artist residencies, spaces for innovation and experimentation. But success brought new challenges. The workers who'd left for Brennan's wanted to return, but positions were filled. The town was changing with new residents drawn by the mill's success, driving up property prices, making it harder for longtime residents to afford homes. "We're gentrifying our own town," Janet observed at a planning meeting. "Then we need to be intentional about preventing it," Audrey replied. "Housing cooperative, land trusts. We apply the same principles to the community that we applied to the mill. It meant more work, more complexity, more chances to fail. But it also meant more opportunity to prove that there were alternatives to the winner-take-all economy that had nearly destroyed them." Winter came early that year, the first snow falling before Halloween. Emma, now 4, and articulate beyond her years, stood at the window watching the flakes fall. "Is this like the storm that brought you and Daddy together?" she asked. "No, sweetheart, that was much worse." "Then it was better," Emma said with child's logic, "because it brought you together." That evening, as they prepared for the harvest festival that had replaced the town's dying Halloween tradition, Audrey found Lyndon in the barn they'd converted into a workshop, finishing a rocking chair for Elizabeth's 85th birthday. 15 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be married to a janitor raising 2 daughters in a small Pennsylvania town running a textile cooperative, you'd have laughed them out of your Manhattan office, he finished. I'd have had security escort them out. She ran her hand along the chair's smooth arm, marveling at the skill in its creation. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if the storm hadn't come? If we'd never met? The mill would be gone. The town would be dying. Claire might not have survived. You'd be rich and miserable." He pulled her close. "So no, I don't wonder. I'm just grateful." The Harvest Festival drew crowds from 3 counties. The mill tours booked solid, the marketplace bustling with early holiday shopping. Clara's booth, where she sketched portraits for donations to the medical fund, had a line throughout the day. Emma helped by providing running commentary on each portrait, making the subjects laugh, and Clara roll her eyes with preteen exasperation. Patricia Wells from Brennan's appeared near sunset, no longer sharp-suited, but wearing jeans and a thoughtful expression. "I quit," she said without preamble when she found Audrey. "Couldn't do it anymore. Watching what you've built here, what we're destroying there. I want to help if you'll let me." "I'll help how?" "I know their weaknesses, their contracts, their plans. I can help you compete." "We don't want to compete. We want to coexist." "Noble, naive. They won't let you coexist. They want to own this market." "Then we'll have to create a different market." Patricia stared at her, then laughed, genuine this time, not corporate. "You really have changed the game, haven't you?" "We didn't change it. We just stopped playing it." As the festival wound down, Audrey stood with her family on the mill's roof deck, another renovation providing a gathering space with views of the entire valley. The town spread below them, lights twinkling like earthbound stars, the sound of music and laughter drifting up through the cold air. "Tell us the storm story again," Emma requested, curled between her parents with Clara leaning against Lyndon's other side. So Audrey told it the story they all knew by heart, but never tired of hearing. How a corporate executioner had come to kill a mill. How a janitor had shared his soup and saved her life. How a dying building had forced them together and shown them what mattered. How a little girl's courage had taught them all to fight dragons. "And then what happened?" Emma asked, though she knew. "And then," Lyndon continued, "we all lived." "Happily ever after," Emma pressed. "Happily right now," Clara corrected, using the phrase she'd coined years ago. "And now, and now." As if in agreement, snow began to fall again, gentle this time, blessing, rather than burial. The mill stood strong beneath them, no longer just surviving but thriving, proof that sometimes the things that seem to destroy us are actually delivering us to exactly where we need to be. "Mom," Clara said suddenly, "I've been thinking about college." Audrey's heart clenched, Clara growing up, potentially leaving the cycle of children moving on that every parent faced. "MIT has a great design program," Clara continued. "But they also have social entrepreneurship. I want to learn both, then come back and make Greyhaven even better." "You want to come back?" Lyndon's voice was carefully neutral, but Audrey could hear the hope beneath. "Of course, this is home. This is where we fight dragons and weather storms and save things worth saving. Why would I want to be anywhere else?" Below them, the festival continued, the cooperative mill's success, drawing people from struggling towns across the region, all coming to see proof that there was another way. Patricia Wells was deep in conversation with Tom about distribution strategies. Miguel was showing his latest designs to a buyer from a major sustainable fashion brand. Elizabeth, despite her age, was teaching a group of children the traditional weaving patterns that had nearly been lost. "We did it," Lyndon said quietly. "We actually did it." "Did what?" Emma asked. "We survived," Audrey said. "More than that, we showed others how to survive too." But even as she said it, she knew survival was too small a word for what they'd accomplished. They hadn't just survived the storm that brought them together, or the challenges that followed. They'd transformed destruction into creation, isolation, into community, a dying mill, into a living symbol of possibility. The next morning brought news that Brennan's was closing their automated facility, unable to compete with the cooperative marketplace's authenticity. The workers they'd poached came to the mill seeking their old jobs back, humbled and wiser. "We can't take everyone back immediately," Audrey explained at an emergency meeting. "But we can help them start their own cooperative, transform the Brennan's building into something useful." "Help our competition?" Tom asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Help our community. If we've learned anything, it's that there's enough success to go around if we're willing to share it." Clara home sick from school with a cold that had everyone slightly on edge despite its mildness. Designed a logo for the new cooperative that day, a phoenix rising from what looked like factory smoke. "Because they're starting over from ashes," she explained between sneezes. The plan took shape quickly. The experienced worker owners would mentor the new cooperative, sharing knowledge, freely helping them find their own niche in the marketplace. Some focused on technical textiles, others on industrial applications. The diversity made the whole network stronger. "You're building an empire,"
Patricia Wells observed, now officially hired as strategic consultant. We're building an ecosystem, Audrey corrected. Empires fall, ecosystems endure.